Welcome to Wizarding What If. Magic was never meant to be divided. Light called itself pure. Dark called itself truth. But what if Harry Potter mastered both? Not to rule the wizarding world, but to save it from its own lies. This is the story of a wizard who walked between shadows and light, and rewrote fate itself. Chapter 1. The Ashes of Albus. The air in the Great Hall didn't just feel cold. It felt dead. It was that bone-deep, marrow-freezing chill that follows a Dementor's shadow, but there wasn't a cloak in sight. Just the smell of ozone, burnt parchment, and the metallic tang of blood that refused to scrub out of the floorboards. Harry sat at the end of the Gryffindor table, his fingers tracing the jagged grooves in the wood. He wasn't looking at the debris or the weary faces of the survivors. He was looking at his hands. They were shaking, not from fear, but from a frequency he couldn't tune out. Since the moment Voldemort's body had hit the stone with that pathetic, mundane thud, the static in Harry's head had shifted into a roar. "You're doing it again, Harry," Hermione whispered. She sat across from him, her face a map of bruises and dried tears. She looked like she'd aged a decade in a single night. "Doing what?" Harry's voice was a rasp, a ghost of the boy who had walked into the forest to die. "The lights. Look at the candles." Harry looked up. The floating candles that usually illuminated the hall with a warm, golden glow were flickering rhythmically. But they weren't burning orange anymore. The flames were a violent, bruised purple, pulsing like a failing heart. "I'm just tired, my own," Harry lied. The lie tasted like copper. He could feel it. The Elder Wand was tucked into his pocket, and it felt like a lightning rod sutured to his thigh. But it wasn't just the wand. It was the space inside him. The hole where a piece of Tom Riddle's soul used to rot wasn't empty. It was a vacuum, and it was starting to pull. The doors of the Great Hall groaned open. Kingsley Shacklebolt walked in, his aura robes singed and heavy. He didn't head for the staff table. He headed straight for Harry. The silence that followed him was heavy. The kind of silence that precedes a verdict. "Harry," Kingsley said, his voice deep and weary. "We need to talk about the Ministry. They're already mobilizing. They want the boy who lived Ed to stand on a podium and tell the world that the darkness is gone. They want a parade." Harry finally looked up. His green eyes were different. The vibrance was gone, replaced by a swirling, nebulous depth that made Kingsley flinch. "The darkness isn't gone, Kingsley. It just doesn't have a face anymore. You can't kill an idea with a killing curse. The people need hope," Kingsley pressed. "Ey need to know the hierarchy is restored. The hierarchy is what killed my parents," Harry snapped, the purple candles overhead flaring with a sudden, sharp hiss. "The hierarchy is what let a megalomaniac run a school for 7 years because they were too afraid to admit the system was broken. I'm done being the poster boy for a rotting house." He stood up, and the motion was too fluid, too predatory for a 17-year-old boy. Ron, who had been sitting in a daze next to Hermione, finally blinked. "Harry, where are you going?" "To see a man about a legacy," Harry said. He walked out of the hall, his boots echoing against the stone like hammer strikes. He didn't stop until he reached the headmaster's office. The gargoyle was already destroyed, a heap of rubble that didn't dare block his path. He climbed the stairs, the air getting thinner, the magic thicker. Inside, the portraits were uncharacteristically silent. Phineas Nigellus Black was watching him with a predatory curiosity. Dumbledore's portrait, however, was empty. Harry walked to the Pensieve. It sat on its pedestal, shimmering with the silvery memories of a man who thought he could play God with a wooden stick. Harry pulled the Elder Wand from his pocket. The wood felt warm. No, hot. It was vibrating, singing a song of conquest that Harry realized he could finally understand. "The Master of Death," Harry whispered to the empty room. "What a load of absolute garbage." He pointed the wand at the Pensieve. Usually, memories were delicate things. But Harry didn't want to watch. He wanted to pull. "I know you're in there, Albus," Harry growled. "You don't get to sleep this one out." He lashed out with a strand of magic that wasn't white, wasn't red, but a shimmering, oily black gold. It dived into the basin, hooking into the essence of the memories left behind. The office began to shake. Books fell from shelves. The silver instruments on the tables began to scream in a high-pitched metallic frequency. "Harry James Potter, cease this at once." Phineas Nigellus barked from his frame. Harry didn't even look at him. He twisted the wand, his knuckles white. You taught me that there are things worse than death, Albus. You forgot to mention that being a pawn is one of them. Come out. I'm rewriting the script. The water in the Pensieve began to boil. A figure began to coalesce from the silvery mist, not a ghost, not a memory, but a projection of pure magical intent. It was Dumbledore, looking as he did the night he died on the tower, but his eyes were voids. Harry, the projection sighed, the voice echoing from the walls themselves. You have won. Why do you seek to disturb the peace of the departed? Because you left me a world of ash. Harry yelled, the force of his voice cracking the stone floor. You thought by killing Voldemort, the light would win. Look outside. The Ministry is already planning the next round of pure blood reforms under a different name. The dark families are being hunted like animals, creating a new generation of monsters. You didn't fix the world, you just tipped the scales back to a side that's just as blind. The balance is delicate, Harry, the Dumbledore echo replied. Magic is a river. You cannot force it to flow uphill. Then I'll build a damn dam, Harry said, his voice dropping to a terrifying calm. He raised the Elder Wand. In his other hand, he pulled the resurrection stone from his pocket, the stone he was supposed to have dropped in the forest. He hadn't, he couldn't, and the invisibility cloak, draped over his shoulders, began to ripple like liquid shadows. The Hallows were together. For the first time in history, they weren't just being held. They were being commanded by someone who had seen the bottom of the grave and climbed back out. You told me that the Hallows were just a story for children, Harry said, stepping closer to the boiling Pensieve. But I felt it in the forest. When the curse hit me, I didn't just see you. I saw the source. I saw the weave. Light magic is just a filter. Dark magic is just a lack of one. It's all just energy, and I'm tired of watching people die over the color of their sparks. Harry, you are playing with forces that even the Founders feared, the echo warned, its image flickering. Good. Maybe it's time someone gave them something to actually be afraid of. Harry plunged the Elder Wand into the heart of the Pensieve. The explosion wasn't loud, it was an implosion of sound. Every window in the headmaster's office shattered outward, but the glass didn't fall. It suspended in midair, shimmering like diamonds. A pillar of light erupted from the basin, half blinding white, half deepest obsidian. They swirled together, a double helix of forbidden power that climbed through the roof, piercing the clouds above Hogwarts. Outside, the survivors stumbled into the courtyard, looking up at the sky. The clouds were being torn apart. A massive, swirling vortex of violet and gold centered directly over the headmaster's tower. Back in the office, Harry was at the center of the storm. His skin was glowing, his veins tracing lines of liquid fire down his arms. He wasn't just casting a spell. He was reaching into the very foundation of the ley lines that ran beneath the castle. I renounce the light that hides in cowardice, Harry intoned, his voice sounding like two people speaking at once. I renounce the dark that feeds on cruelty. I claim the gray. I claim the void. I claim the right to decide what magic is. The Dumbledore echo screamed, a sound of pure static, as it was absorbed into the wand. Harry felt every memory Albus ever had. Every mistake. Every calculated sacrifice. He saw the way the Ministry had spent centuries lobotomizing the wizarding world, banning dark magic not because it was evil, but because it was hard to control. He saw the way the light had used good as a leash. No more, Harry gasped, his vision blurring. He slammed his hand onto the stone floor. A pulse of magic rolled out from the tower. It wasn't a shockwave, it was a transmutation. The stone of Hogwarts, ancient and sentient, groaned in response. The magic didn't just pass through the walls, it rewrote them. The enchantments that kept the dark arts suppressed began to dissolve, replaced by something older, something primal. In the Great Hall, Hermione felt her wand vibrate. She pulled it out and watched in horror as the wood changed color, turning a deep, matte charcoal. The sparks that flew from the tip were no longer red, they were a shimmering, iridescent silver that felt both warm and freezing. Harry, what have you done? She whispered to the empty air. Up in the tower, Harry collapsed. The office was silent now. The Pensieve was cracked in half, the water evaporated. The glass shards finally fell, clattering to the floor like rain. Harry stayed on his knees, gasping for air. His hair, once jet black, now had a single streak of pure white running through the center. He looked at his reflection in a piece of broken glass. His eyes weren't green anymore. They were the color of the void between stars. The war didn't end, Harry whispered, his voice sounding older than the stones beneath him. It just got a new commander. He stood up, the Elder Wand clicking against his palm. He could feel every soul in the castle. He could feel the trees in the Forbidden Forest. He could feel the heartbeat of the world. And for the first time, he wasn't the boy who lived. He was the man who decided who lived. He walked to the window and looked out at the sunrise. But the sun didn't look the same. The light was filtered through the new atmosphere he had created. It was a dawn of twilight. Kingsley wanted a parade, Harry said, a dark, jagged smile tugging at his lips. I think I'll give him a revolution instead. He turned and walked toward the door, the shadows at his feet moving independently of his body, stretching and reaching like hungry hounds. The era of the light was over. The era of the dark was dead. Harry Potter was something else entirely. End of Chapter 1. Chapter 2. The Black Crown of London. The Ministry of Magic didn't smell like victory. It smelled like wet wool, desperate bureaucracy, and the slow-rotting ozone of 1,000 safe spells. Harry stood in the center of the atrium, the golden statues of the Fountain of Magical Brethren now nothing more than twisted, melted slag. He had walked through the front doors, not the visitor's entrance, not the fireplaces. He had walked through the literal reinforced gold-leafed doors, and they had turned to dust at his touch. Around him, a circle of 40 Aurors stood with wands leveled. Their hands were shaking. They had heard the rumors from Hogwarts. The boy who conquered was no longer the boy they knew. Harry, please, Kingsley Shacklebolt called out from the balcony of the minister's office. He looked down at the 19-year-old standing in the center of the room. Harry wasn't wearing robes. He was wearing black dragon hide boots, dark denim, and a heavy, charcoal-colored trench coat that seemed to swallow the light. We are trying to rebuild. We are trying to bring order. This defiance is exactly what the remnants of the Death Eaters want to see. Harry didn't look up. He was watching the floor. Under his boots, the black tiles were beginning to frost over with a strange, crystalline substance. Order is just a word you use to keep the poor and the untainted in their place, Kingsley. You're not rebuilding. You're just re-wallpapering a tomb. Stand down, Potter. Gawain Robards, the head of the Auror office, stepped forward, his wand tip glowing a fierce, aggressive red. You may have finished Riddle, but you don't own this ministry. One more saint, EP, and we will treat you as a hostile combatant. Harry finally raised his head. The streak of white hair across his brow looked like a scar in the air. His eyes, those void dark pits, locked onto Robards. Hostile. You haven't seen hostile yet, Gawain. You've spent centuries categorizing magic into neat and naughty. You've banned the soul fire, you've suppressed the blood rites, and you've RNED our world into a playground for people who are afraid of their own shadows. The dark arts corrupt, a younger Auror yelled, his voice cracking. Ignorance corrupts, Harry roared back, and the sound wasn't human. It was a sonic boom that shattered every window in the surrounding offices. The Aurors fell back, shielding their faces. Magic isn't a moral choice. It's a force of nature. You don't call a hurricane evil, and you don't call a sunbeam good. They just are. Harry began to walk. Fire! Robards screamed. 40 stupefy and impedimenta spells hurtled toward Harry in a concentrated barrage of red and blue light. Harry didn't even raise the Elder Wand. He simply exhaled. A shroud of obsidian smoke erupted from his pores, thick and viscous as oil. The spells hit the smoke and were simply absorbed. No explosion, no deflection. They just vanished into the nothingness surrounding him. Harry kept walking, the smoke trailing behind him like the wings of a fallen god. He reached the first line of Aurors. With a casual flick of his fingers, he didn't cast a spell, he manipulated the gravity around them. 6 men were slammed into the ceiling, pinned there by an invisible force that made their bones groan. I'm not here to kill you, Harry said, his voice echoing through the entire subterranean complex. I'm here to change the frequency. The Ministry is no longer the arbiter of what a wizard can be. He reached the elevator grills and tore them open with his bare hands, the metal screaming as it twisted into knots. He didn't take the lift. He stepped into the open shaft and drifted upward, defying the laws of flight that had governed their kind for millennia. He landed on the balcony in front of Kingsley. The Minister for Magic looked at Harry, and for the first time, he saw the terrifying truth. Harry wasn't using the Hallows. The Hallows were him. The Elder Wand wasn't in his hand. It was tucked into his sleeve, but Harry's very fingers were sparking with the same prehistoric power. "What do you want, Harry?" Kingsley asked, his voice a broken whisper. "The veil," Harry said, "and the records of the unspeakables. Everything they've hidden about the forbidden origins of the great houses." "You're going to the Department of Mysteries." "To do what?" "To wake up the ancestors," Harry said. "Voldemort wanted to be an immortal king. He was a fool. He wanted to rule a graveyard. I want to build a world where a graveyard isn't necessary." Harry pushed past Kingsley and headed for the Department of Mysteries. He didn't need a key. The door simply recognized its master and dissolved. Inside the brain room, the atmosphere shifted. It was cold, silent, and heavy with the weight of forgotten thoughts. Harry ignored the jars of pulsing gray matter and walked straight to the room of death. The stone archway stood in the center of the pit, the tattered black veil fluttering in a wind that didn't exist. This was where Sirius had fallen. This was where the world ended. Harry stood at the edge of the dais. He pulled the resurrection stone from his pocket. It didn't look like a stone anymore, it looked like a hole in reality. "They told me I couldn't bring them back," Harry whispered to the veil. "They told me the dead must stay dead because the balance demands it. But the balance is a lie told by the weak." He held the stone high and pointed the Elder Wand at the center of the archway. "I am the master of the three," Harry intoned. "I am the bridge. I am the gatekeeper. By the blood in my veins and the void in my heart, I command the veil to bleed." He didn't cast a beam of light. He threw a tether of shadow. The shadow hooked into the veil and pulled. The room began to scream. Not the voices of the dead Harry had heard before, faint and whispering, but a collective, agonizing shriek of 1,000 years of trapped souls. The stone archway began to crack. Runes that had been carved before the Roman Empire began to glow with a sickly, neon-green light. "Harry, stop." He turned to see Hermione and Ron at the entrance. They had followed him through the chaos. Ron was holding his wand, but it was shaking so hard he could barely grip it. Hermione looked terrified, her eyes darting between Harry and the tearing veil. "Harry, you're ripping the fabric of the world," she cried. "You can't just pull people back from the beyond. There's a price, a cosmic price. I've already paid it," Harry shouted back, his face contorted in a mask of divine fury. "I died. I stood in that white version of King's Cross and I saw what's on the other side. It's nothingness, Hermione. It's just waiting. Why should we wait for the end when we can pull the wisdom of the past into the present? This isn't wisdom, it's necromancy," she screamed. "It's evolution." The veil tore. A blast of pure, unadulterated cold swept through the room, instantly turning the air to ice. From the rift, figures began to emerge. They weren't ghosts. They weren't solid. They were something in between, wraiths of silver and smoke. The first to emerge was a tall man with long, flowing robes and a face carved from granite. Salazar Slytherin. Beside him, a woman with eyes like winter storms, Rowena Ravenclaw. One by one, the founders of Hogwarts stepped through the rift. They didn't look like the portraits. They looked like gods who had been starved for centuries. Harry dropped to one knee. But not out of subservience. It was the weight of the magic. He looked up at Salazar, who was staring at Harry's white streaked hair and void black eyes. "So," Salazar said, his voice like grinding tectonic plates, "a descendant of Peverell has finally grown a spine. You broke the lock. I broke the world," Harry corrected, gasping. "Now help me fix it." Salazar looked around at the sterile, stone room. Then at the terrified ministry workers gathering at the door. He sneered. "This is what became of our dream. A bunker for cowards." "The Ministry of Magic," Harry spat. "They spend their days making sure no one gets too powerful. They've strangled the gift." Rowena Ravenclaw stepped forward, her hand reaching out to touch the air. "The mana in this era is thin. Diluted. You've let the mundanes and the weak-blooded dictate the flow of the weave. I want to rewrite the laws, Harry said, standing up. He looked at the four founders. I want to unite the light and the dark. I want to build an empire where magic isn't a secret, but a sovereign power. No more hiding. No more international statute of secrecy. No more fearing the dark. Godric Gryffindor, his PHA, Entom's sword shimmering with a spectral heat, stepped forward. To unite the poles, you must become the center, boy. Do you have the heart to bear the weight of a world that will hate you for saving it? I've been hated my whole life, Harry said, the elder wand humming a low, predatory chord. I'm used to it. Then let the great work begin, Salazar said, his spectral hand resting on Harry's shoulder. The moment they touched, a massive flare of power erupted, shattering the room of death entirely. The Ministry of Magic shook to its very foundations. High above, in the streets of London, the Muggles looked on in terror as the ground cracked and a massive, obsidian spire began to grow out of the earth, erupting through the center of Whitehall. It was a tower of black stone and silver light, reaching higher than any skyscraper. Piercing the clouds, Harry Potter stood at the top of the spire, the four founders flanking him like guardians of the apocalypse. He looked down at the city of London, the millions of lives. The sprawling technology, the smallness of it all. He raised his wand to the sky. The clouds turned black, and a rain of silver sparks began to fall over the entire world. Hear me. Harry's voice broadcasted into the mind of every living person on the planet, wizard and muggle alike. The age of shadows is over. The age of the masquerade is dead. I am Harry Potter, and I have reclaimed the source. Magic is no longer a secret. It is the law. In a small flat in London, a muggle woman watched as her kitchen knife began to float. In a hidden manor in Wiltshire, a disgraced Lucius Malfoy fell to his knees as his magic, once stagnant and weak, suddenly surged with a terrifying, violent vitality. The world changed in a heartbeat. The balance was gone. The new era had a king. And he wore a crown of black lightning. Now, Harry whispered to the wind. We see who is truly worthy of the gift. End of Chapter 2. Chapter 3. The Blood of the Founders. The obsidian spire didn't just sit in the heart of London. It pulsed. It was a rhythmic, low-frequency thrum that made the Thames ripple and the steel of nearby skyscrapers groan. To the Muggles, it was a nightmare made of stone. An impossible geometry that defied physics. To the wizards, it was a beacon of raw, unfiltered mana that made their skin itch and their old wands spark with a hunger they couldn't control. Harry stood in the crown, the open-air summit of the spire. The wind up here was vicious, howling through the stone teeth of the parapets, but it didn't touch him. It swirled around him, diverted by an invisible pressure. The world is screaming, boy, Salazar Slytherin said, leaning against a pillar of floating mercury. His spectral form was becoming more solid by the hour, feeding on the ambient magic Harry was pumping into the atmosphere. They are terrified. The sheep have realized the fence is gone, and they can finally see the wolves. Let them scream, Harry said. He was staring at a holographic map of the globe suspended in the air. Thousands of red pinpricks were appearing, locations where magic was boiling over. In the United States, the MACUSA headquarters had been leveled by a surge of uncontrolled transfiguration. In Paris, the streets were glowing with blue fire. Fear is the first step toward respect. They've spent centuries thinking magic was a parlor trick or a bedtime story. Now they know it's the fundamental code of reality. You've triggered a second convergence, Rowena Ravenclaw observed, her phantom fingers tracing the ley lines on Harry's map. By anchoring us here and shattering the veil, you've thinned the barrier between the physical and the astral. The squibs and the muggles, their minds will break if they aren't shielded. I'm not shielding them, Harry said, his voice cold. I'm letting the world adapt. Those who can channel the surge will survive. Those who can't, well, Darwin was a wizard in spirit, wasn't he? Harry, the voice came from the teleportation plate at the center of the floor. Hermione stepped off, followed by Ron and a grim-looking Neville Longbottom. They looked exhausted, their clothes singed and their faces pale. The world is falling apart, Harry. Hermione shouted, her voice cracking against the wind. I just saw a news report from New York. People are manifesting powers they can't control. They're burning down cities. The Muggle militaries are mobilizing. They're calling it a global terrorist attack. They're preparing to nuke the magical centers. Harry turned slowly. The white streak in his hair seemed to glow in the twilight. Let them try. A nuclear strike is just a massive release of kinetic and thermal energy. I can turn a blast wave into a breeze with a thought. Their weapons are toys, Hermione. It's not just about the weapons. Ron stepped forward, his hand on the hilt of the sword at his belt, a new blade he'd taken from the Malfoy vaults, etched with runes of protection. It's the people, mate. You're talking about billions of lives. You're acting like Riddle. You're sitting on a high throne looking down on everyone like they're ants. Harry walked toward Ron, his boots making no sound on the obsidian. He was a head taller now, his posture radiating a predatory grace. Riddle wanted to rule because he was afraid of dying. I'm ruling because I'm the only one who knows what's coming. The light would have let us fade into obscurity until the Muggles developed technology that made us obsolete. The dark would have started a war they couldn't win. I'm choosing a third path, total integration. By force, Neville asked, his voice steady despite the overwhelming aura Harry was putting off. By necessity, Harry countered. I've felt the pulse of the earth, Neville. The magic was dying. It was stagnant. By uniting the Hallows and tearing the veil, I've restarted the heart of the world. But it is not enough to just wake it up. We have to guide it. Suddenly, the air in the crown fractured. A bolt of pure, white-hot energy slammed into the spire's shielding. The entire tower shuddered. Harry didn't flinch, but his eyes narrowed. The ICW, Harry hissed. The International Confederation of Wizards. They finally found their courage. High above the spire, a fleet of enchanted warships, ancient galleons reinforced with modern steel and heavy-duty protective charms, emerged from the clouds. They were the elite strike force of the global wizarding government, manned by hit wizards from every nation. Harry Potter, a magically amplified voice boomed from the lead ship. You are charged with high treason against the magical species, the breach of the Statute of Secrecy, and the illegal use of necromancy. Surrender the Hallows and dismantle this spire, or you will be erased from history. Harry looked at Salazar and Godric. The two founders shared a grim, hungry smile. They brought ships to a god fight. Godric laughed, his spectral sword flaring with golden fire. How quaint. Harry, don't. Hermione pleaded. If you kill them, there's no turning back. You'll be the villain they say you are. I stopped caring about being the hero the second I felt the cold of the afterlife, Hermione. Harry said. He stepped to the edge of the parapet and looked up at the fleet. He didn't pull his wand. He simply raised his arms, palm up. You want the Hallows, Harry shouted, his voice vibrating through the very hull of the lead warship. Come and take them from the source. He closed his eyes and reached into the spire. He didn't draw on his own magic, he drew on the ley lines he had anchored to the tower. He tapped into the raw, chaotic energy of the earth itself, the dark, gravity and the light, heat. Convergence. Harry roared. A massive, swirling vortex of violet-black energy erupted from his chest, shooting skyward. It wasn't a beam, it was a hungry maw. The lead warship's shields shattered like glass the moment the energy touched them. The wood and steel didn't explode. They began to unravel. The ship was turned into a swarm of crows. Thousands of black birds erupted from the space where the vessel had been, screaming and fluttering in the gale. The other ships opened fire, unleashing a barrage of killing curses and blasting hexes. Harry didn't move. He waved his hand, and the air in front of him solidified into a mirror of liquid shadow. The spells hit the mirror and were reflected back, but they weren't the same spells anymore. They had been grayed, stripped of their intent and turned into pure, destructive force. Two ships were vaporized instantly. A third began to fall, its sails turned to lead. He's not even casting, Ron whispered, watching in horror. He's just thinking it. Harry wasn't done. He felt the surge of power. The intoxicating rush of the Black Crown. He reached out and grabbed the air, twisting his hands as if he were wringing a towel. The gravity around the remaining fleet inverted. The ships were crushed into spheres of scrap metal. The wizards inside silenced before they could even scream. Then, with a final flick of his wrist, Harry turned the spheres into dust. A fine, silver powder settled over London. Silence returned to the crown, broken only by the heavy breathing of Harry's former friends. That was an army, Neville said, his voice trembling. That was the best they had. And they were nothing. Harry said, turning back to them. His eyes were glowing so brightly now that the pupils were barely visible. The world is changing, whether you like it or not. The old governments are dead. The old rules are gone. He walked over to Hermione and touched her cheek. His hand was unnaturally warm. I'm not the monster you're afraid of, my own. I'm the wall between us and the chaos. The Muggles are going to come for us next. Not with wands, but with fire and lead. And when they do, you'll be glad I'm sitting on this throne. You're losing yourself, Harry, she whispered, a tear tracking through the soot on her face. The Harry I knew would never have turned people into birds or dust. The Harry you knew died in the Forbidden Forest, Harry said, pulling his hand away. This one survived. He turned to the founders. Salazar, take the wraiths. Go to the ministry. Purge the holdouts. Godric, Rowena, start the recruitment. Any witch or wizard who wants to thrive in the new world comes here. Any who resist, find a place for them in the dungeons. And Helga? Godric asked, looking at the fourth spot, which remained empty. I'll find her, Harry said. She's the heart. I need the heart to keep the body alive. Quote. He looked back at the holographic map. The red dots were spreading. The revolution was no longer a flicker, it was a wildfire. Go home, Hermione, Harry said, his back to her. Stay in the burrow. I've warded it. You'll be safe there while I finish the rewrite. We're not going anywhere, Ron said, stepping up beside Hermione. If you're going to do this, we're going to stay here and remind you who you are, even if we have to fight you to do it. Harry didn't answer. He just looked out at the horizon, where the sun was setting on the old world. Old feel the Elder Wand humming in his sleeve, a constant, predatory reminder that he was now the ultimate authority. Then stay, Harry whispered, and watch the gods return. End of Chapter 3. Chapter 4. The Architect of the Void. The London fog was no longer a natural phenomenon. It was thick, iridescent, and tasted of ozone and ancient copper, the byproduct of the spire's constant ventilation of raw mana. Below the Black Crown, the city had become a sprawling, silent labyrinth. The Muggles had been placed under a stasis of necessity, a massive, atmospheric compulsion charm that kept the lions of residents in a dream-like state within their homes. They weren't dead, but they were no longer part of the equation. Harry stood in the center of the spire's great library, a room that didn't exist in three-dimensional space. The walls were shelves that spiraled into infinity, containing books that Harry had summoned from the depths of every sealed vault on the planet, the Vatican's secret archives. The burned remnants of Alexandria, and the private collections of the pure-blood elite who had donated them to avoid being turned into garden ornaments. The balance is shifting too fast, Salazar Slytherin said, his form now so solid he cast a shadow on the black marble floor. He was reading a scroll of human skin, his eyes narrow. The earth is pushing back. You've uncapped the wells, Peverell. But the pressure is cracking the foundation. I can handle the pressure, Harry said. He was suspended 4 feet off the ground, surrounded by a dozen floating quills that were rewriting the laws of arithmancy on a massive sheet of floating obsidian. Can you? A new voice echoed through the chamber. It was soft, like the rustle of autumn leaves, but it carried a weight that made the air grow heavy. Helga Hufflepuff emerged from the shadows of the stacks. Unlike the other founders, she didn't look like a warrior or a scholar. She looked like a gardener who had seen her prize roses infested with rot. Her presence was earthy, grounding, and for a moment, the vibrating intensity of the spire seemed to calm. Helga, Harry said, drifting back to the floor. I've been looking for you. I was in the soil, she said, her voice grieving. I was listening to the roots of the world. They're screaming, Harry Potter. You've forced a growth that should have taken 1,000 years into a single week. You are creating a canopy, but you have no root system to support it. I don't have 1,000 years, Harry snapped. The Muggles were already splitting atoms. They were already mapping the genome. If I hadn't acted, they would have found a way to cure magic within a generation. I'm not just a king, Helga. I'm an evolutionary pressure. You are a boy with a broken heart playing with the tools of the Creator. She countered, stepping closer. You think because you united the Hallows, you are the master of death. But death is only one side of the coin. Where is your life, Harry? Where is your mercy? Mercy is a luxury for those who don't have to make the hard choices, Harry said. He waved his hand, and the obsidian sheet vanished. Look at what I've built. The ministry is gone. The blood supremacy is dead because I've opened the source to everyone with the spark. I've ended poverty for our kind. No one is hungry, no one is hiding, and no one is free, she whispered. Harry felt a surge of irritation, a dark, cold pulse that radiated from the Elder Wand. The shadows in the corners of the room stretched, clawing at the light. They are safe. That is enough for now. Harry. Hermione burst into the library, her hair a wild nest of curls, clutching a stack of parchment. Behind her, Ron looked like he hadn't slept in 48 hours. It started, Hermione said, her voice trembling. The resistance. And it's not who you think. The ICW remnants. Harry asked. No, she said, throwing the parchment onto his desk. It's the goblins. They've closed Gringotts. Not just the London branch, every branch worldwide. They've locked the gold, Harry. But more importantly, they've locked the contracts. Harry's eyes darkened. The goblins think they can hold the economy hostage. I'll melt the doors of their bank and turn their gold into lead. It's not just the gold, mate, Ron said, stepping forward. They've activated the old debt. Goblins don't just store money. They store the blood debts of the great houses. By sealing the vaults, they've triggered a magical foreclosure. Every family that owes the goblins, which is basically everyone, is losing their magic. It's being drained into the earth to pay the interest. Harry felt a sharp, stinging pain in his chest. He reached out with his senses and felt it, a massive, rhythmic draining of the ley lines. The goblins weren't just bankers. They were the wardens of the earth's crust. They were using the ancient treaties to siphon the very energy Harry was trying to harness. They're trying to starve me, Harry hissed. They're trying to stop a tyrant, Hermione said, her eyes defiant. They know you can't fight a war without a source. If the goblins drain the mana, the spire falls. And when it falls, it'll take London with it. Then I'll go to the source, Harry said. He didn't walk. He vanished in a blur of black smoke and reappeared in the cavernous lobby of Gringotts. The once bustling hall was silent. The chandeliers were dark. Standing in the center of the marble floor was Ragnarok, the High King of the Goblin Nation, flanked by 100 guards in silver armor, wielding axes that glowed with a malicious anti-magic light. The thief of the Hallows comes to pay his dues. Ragnarok sneered, his voice like grinding stones. Open the vaults, Ragnarok, Harry said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. The era of goblin gatekeeping is over. I am the sovereign. You are a child playing with fire, Ragnarok said, slamming his axe into the floor. The wizards made a pact with the earth through us. We provide the stability. You provide the craft. You have broken the craft. You have flooded the world with raw, unrefined power that threatens to burn the very veins of the world. We are the auditors, Potter. And your account is in the red. I don't care about your ledgers, Harry said. He raised the Elder Wand. The air around him began to warp, the temperature dropping until his breath came out as a white mist. I am rewriting the world. Either you are the foundation, or you are the rubble. Then let us see how your god magic fares against the cold iron of the deep. Ragnarok roared. The goblin guards charged. They didn't use spells. They moved with a terrifying, mechanical precision. Their axes were forged in the heart of the planet, designed to absorb and ground any magical energy they touched. Harry lashed out with a whip of violet flame. One of the guards raised his shield, and the flame didn't just stop, it was eaten by the metal. The guard didn't even slow down. Harry blinked. For the first time since the forest, he felt a flicker of something he had forgotten, vulnerability. The Hallows are of the spirit, wizard. Ragnarok laughed, drawing a jagged short sword. Quote, but the goblins are of the flesh and the stone. You cannot cast a spell on that which does not believe in you. 3 guards lunged at once. Harry spun, the invisibility cloak billowing around him like a cloud of ink. He reappeared behind them and slammed his fist into the floor, unleashing a shockwave of pure kinetic force. The marble shattered, sending the guards flying, but they rolled and came back up instantly. Their armor absorbing the brunt of the impact. Harry realized he couldn't win this with gray magic. He needed something more primal. He closed his eyes and reached down, not into the ley lines, but into his own blood. He tapped into the piece of himself he had tried to bury. The raw, unadulterated anger of the orphan, the boy who lived in a cupboard, the boy who was used as a sacrificial lamb. He didn't cast a spell. He unleashed a scream. The scream wasn't sound. It was a wave of localized reality warping. The air in Gringotts turned to liquid. The silver armor of the goblins began to melt, not from heat, but because Harry was simply willing the atoms to drift apart. You think the earth is yours? Harry roared, his eyes bleeding shadow. I am the one who walked through the gates of hell and came back with the keys. I am the master of the end. He grabbed Ragnarok by the throat with a hand of shadow. The Goblin King struggled, his anti-magic sword passing through Harry's arm as if it were smoke. The gold belongs to the people, Harry hissed into Ragnarok's ear. The contracts are void. The magic stays with the wizards. From this day forward, Gringotts is a tomb. With a brutal twist of his mind, Harry forced the magical essence of the goblins, the deep magic, out of their bodies. It looked like molten gold, pouring from their eyes and mouths, flowing into the floor. Harry directed the flow, weaving it into the very stone of the bank, turning the entire structure into a massive battery for his spire. The goblins didn't die, but they collapsed, their connection to the earth severed. They were now just small, frail creatures in a world that no longer needed them. Harry stood in the center of the ruin, breathing hard. The gold magic was now circulating through him, adding a heavy, metallic weight to his power. He felt invincible. He felt like a god. But then he looked at his hands. They were stained with a gold that wouldn't wash off. Harry, he turned. Hermione and Ron were standing at the entrance, their faces masks of pure horror. You just lobotomized an entire race, Ron whispered, his voice shaking. They weren't even attacking the city, Harry. They were just trying to protect the balance. They were in the way, Harry said, his voice flat. Is everyone who disagrees with you just in the way, now? Hermione asked, her eyes wet with tears. Where does it stop? Do we go next? Does the Weasley family go if we don't bow low enough? I'm doing this for you, Harry yelled, the gold in his veins pulsing. I'm making a RLD where no one can ever hurt you again. Where no one can take your magic or your life. You're making a world where no one can live, Harry. She screamed back. You're making a museum. A beautiful, silent museum of things you control. She turned and ran out of the bank. Ron looked at Harry for a long moment, the disappointment in his eyes cutting deeper than any goblin blade. You won, mate, Ron said quietly. You're the master of death. Hope the silence is worth it. Ron followed her out, leaving Harry alone in the dark, golden tomb of Gringotts. Harry looked up at the ceiling. He could feel the power of the goblins, sacrifice fueling the spire, making his grip on the world absolute. He was the most powerful being to ever walk the earth. But as he stood there, surrounded by the husks of his enemies and the shadows of his friends, he felt a coldness that even the Hallows couldn't warm. The foundation is set, Salazar's voice whispered in his mind. Yeah, Harry whispered back, his voice echoing in the hollow vault. It's set. He walked out of the bank, the gold on his skin shining in the twilight of London. The first phase was complete. The economy of magic was his. The spirits were his. The earth was his. Now, he just had to deal with the Muggles. Because far across the ocean, in a room buried deep beneath the Pentagon, a finger was hovering over a red button. The silence wasn't going to last much longer. End of Chapter 4. Chapter 5. The Iron Rain. The silence in the Black Crown was broken by a sound that magic couldn't mimic, the mechanical, guttural roar of 1,000 jet engines. Harry didn't need the prophecy to know the Muggles had finally found their nerve. The stasis of necessity had been a blanket, but the world was waking up underneath it, and they weren't happy about the new landlord. Harry stood on the precipice of the spire, his trench coat snapping in a wind that smelled like jet fuel and desperation. Below him, the iridescent fog of London was being shredded by the supersonic wakes of F-35s. To the west, the horizon was cluttered with the silhouettes of B-2 Spirit bombers, heavy with the weight of special ordnance. They are coming with the fire of their stars, Harry Potter, Rowena Ravenclaw said, appearing at his side. Her spectral form was flickering, agitated by the sheer amount of electronic interference saturating the air. The IR science has detected the spike in the magnetosphere. They think you are a rift in reality that needs to be cauterized. Let them try to cauterize the sun, Harry said. Behind him, the Great Hall O.F. the spire was filled with the new, Grey Council. There were reformed Death Eaters looking for a second chance, Order of the Phoenix members who had nowhere else to go, and the 4 founders. Hermione, and Ron were absent. They had retreated to the burrow, a move Harry allowed because he couldn't bear to see the judgment in their eyes when the sky turned to lead. Harry, we have incoming signatures, Neville Longbottom shouted, standing over a scrying pool that had been modified with Technomancy to track Muggle radar. Missiles. Hundreds of them. Not just from the UK. The Americans, the Russians, they've launched everything. They aren't trying to capture the city. They're trying to erase it. The nuclear option, Salazar Slytherin hissed. A primitive way to die. Harry closed his eyes. He reached out with his mind, connecting to the spire, then to the ley lines, and finally to the 3 halos that pulsed within his very marrow. He felt the world as a series of vibrations. He felt the missiles, long, cold tubes of steel and plutonium screaming through the stratosphere at Mach 5. They think they're fighting a war, Harry whispered. They're just trying to delete a file. He raised the Elder Wand. It didn't spark. It bled a deep, liquid violet that pooled at his feet before rushing up the sides of the spire like a climbing vine. Aegis Void. Harry's voice didn't travel through the air. It vibrated through the atoms of the city. A dome of shimmering, translucent obsidian erupted from the base of the spire, expanding at the speed of light. It swept over London, over the suburbs, over the rolling hills of the countryside until it covered the entire British Isles. The first wave of missiles hit. In the Muggle world, the explosions would have been the end of history. Blinding flashes of white light, mushroom clouds, and the vaporization of millions. But against the Aegis Void, they were nothing more than raindrops hitting a window. The nuclear fire was absorbed. Harry didn't just block the energy. He consumed it. He felt the raw, chaotic heat of the split atoms rushing into the spire's battery. The black stone of the tower began to glow a dull, dangerous orange. He's eating the fallout, Godric Gryffindor said, a grim respect in his voice. He's turning their extinction into his fuel. But Harry was straining. The sheer volume of kinetic energy was massive. His veins felt like they were being filled with molten lead. He could feel the pressure behind his eyes, the gold-stained skin on his hands beginning to crack. Is that all? Harry roared at the sky. Is that the best the old world can do? As if in answer, the sky darkened further. Not from clouds, but from the arrival of the Iron Rain. The Muggles hadn't just sent missiles. They had sent rods from God, kinetic bombardment weapons from orbital satellites. Solid tungsten pillars falling from space, moving at 10 times the speed of sound. They didn't have warheads. They didn't need them. The impact alone was enough to crack a continental plate. The first rod hit the dome directly above the spire. The impact was so violent that the foundations of London groaned. The Aegis Void flickered. Harry was slammed to his knees, his nose bleeding a dark, magical ichor. Harry, Neville yelled, moving to help him. Stay back. Harry snarled, his eyes flashing with a terrifying, prismatic light. He looked up. Another 12 rods were descending. If they hit the weakened dome, the feedback would shatter every wizarding heart connected to the spire's network. Harry stood up, his legs shaking. He dropped the Elder Wand. I don't need the stick, he growled. He reached into his chest and pulled. He wasn't pulling magic. He was pulling the concept of the Resurrection Stone and the Invisible Liddy cloak into a singular point of focus. He became a singularity. He leapt. Harry didn't fly. He simply ceased to be in one place and began to be in another. He appeared a mile above the spire, dire. CTLY in the path of the falling tungsten pillars. He held out his hands. Transmute. The first rod hit his palms. It should have turned him into a red smear. Instead, the tungsten began to soften. It turned from solid metal into liquid mercury, then into a swarm of silver butterflies that dispersed harmlessly into the wind. He moved through the air like a glitch in a video game, appearing in front of each rod and turning the instruments of mass destruction into something beautiful and fragile. Flowers, birds, autumn leaves, and eventually, just pure, harmless light. The Iron Rain had failed. Harry hovered in the stratosphere. Looking down at the earth, he could see the lights of the world, the terrified cities, the buzzing hives of humanity. He felt a cold, detached pity. You had your chance to lead yourselves, Harry said. His voice carried to every radio, every television, and every mind on the planet via the spire's amplification. You chose fire. You chose the atom. Now, I choose the silence. He descended back to the crown, landing softly. His face was pale, his white-streaked hair standing on end. What now? Salazar asked. They will not stop. They will build bigger fires. No, Harry said. I'm taking their fire away. He walked to the center of the crown and pointed his finger at the horizon. I am the master of the Hallows. I am the bridge between the light and the dark. By my blood, I decree. The flame of the mundane is extinguished. A pulse of gray magic rolled out from the spire, a wave of anti-entropy. It swept across the globe, moving through wires, through engines, through the very hearts of machines. In Washington, D.C., the lights went out. Not just the lights. The generators died. The combustion engines in the tanks stalled. The electronics in the bunkers fried. Every piece of technology more complex than a steam engine simply stopped working. The world went dark. You've plunged them into the Stone Age, Helga Hufflepuff said, her voice filled with a terrible sadness. I've given them a chance to start over without the toys that would have killed them, Harry said. Now, we provide the light. We provide the heat, but on our terms. He turned to the Grey Council. Spread out. Go to the cities. Establish the sanctums. If they want light, they pray to the spire. If they want food, they come to the wizards. The masquerade isn't just over. The roles have been reversed. We are the gods now. And gods don't hide in cupboards. Harry walked toward his private chambers, but stopped when he saw a single figure waiting by the door. It was Luna Lovegood. She looked exactly the same as the day they left Hogwarts, misty-eyed, wearing her radish earrings, and holding a copy of the Quibbler that was now blank. The Raxperts are very loud today, Harry, she said softly. I don't have time for the riddles, Luna, Harry said, his voice tired. It's not a riddle, she said, walking up to him and placing a hand on his chest, right over his heart. You've turned off the world's noise, but you've forgotten to turn off your own. You're humming, Harry, you're humming the same tune Tom used to sing. Harry looked down at her. For a moment, the void in his eyes flickered, and a hint of the old green returned. I'm saving them, Luna. You're saving the museum, she whispered. But the people inside are starting to look like statues. She turned and walked away, her footsteps light and airy. Harry stood alone in the hallway. He could feel the power of the globe's magic flowing into him, the trillions of lives now dependent on his will. It was the ultimate victory. So why did it feel like he was the one who was trapped? He shook the thought away and entered his room. He had work to do. He had a world to rebuild. And as he sat on his throne of black glass, he realized he didn't need to sleep anymore. The Master of Death had no use for dreams. End of Chapter 5. Chapter 6. The Silent Rain. The world did not end with a bang or a whimper, it ended with a click. The grand machinery of the 21st century, the satellites, the power grids, the fiber optic nerves of a global civilization, had been severed. In its place was the grand silence, a heavy, mystical blanket that draped over the continents. From the heights of the Black Crown, the planet looked different. At night, the sprawling webs of electric gold were gone, replac. Ed by the flickering orange of wood fires and the eerie, cold glow of the sanctums Harry had planted in every major city. Harry stood in the center of his map room, his fingers hovering over the glowing ley lines of Eurasia. He looked thinner, his cheekbones sharp enough to cut, and the white streak in his hair had spread, a snowy crown against the midnight black. He no longer wore shoes, his bare feet were blackened at the soles from the raw magical soot of the spire. The Parisian sanctum is reporting a deficit, Rowena Ravenclaw's voice echoed through the chamber. She was nearly physical now, her robes stiff with the power Harry channeled into the founders. The populace is resisting the transition. They refuse to use the warming charms. They are freezing out of spite. Then let them freeze until their spite turns to ice, Harry said. His voice was a low vibration that made the air shimmer. I am providing them with a world without cancer, without pollution, without the nuclear shadow. If they want to cling to their old Dying fire. That is their choice. It's not a choice if the alternative is a prayer to a boy they've never met, a voice rang out. Harry didn't turn. He knew the frequency of that soul. Hello, Hermione. Hermione Granger stepped out of the shadows. She looked ragged. Her jeans were torn, and she wore a heavy cloak that looked like it had been stitched together from scraps. She wasn't carrying a wand. She was carrying a book, the old, battered copy of the Tales of Beedle the Bard. The burrow is empty, Harry, she said, her voice steady despite the overwhelming pressure of the spire's core. The Weasleys left. They couldn't stay in a house that was allowed to exist by your grace. They've gone into the underground. There is no underground, Harry said, finally turning to face her. His eyes were twins of the void, swirling with the gray. Every inch of the Earth's crust is mapped by my intent. I know where every heart beats. Then you know Ron is leading them, she said. Harry's jaw tightened. A crack appeared in the obsidian floor beneath him. Ron is a fool. He thinks he's playing the hero in a story that ended years ago. I saved his life. I saved all their lives. You saved their bodies, Harry. You're killing their spirits. She walked toward him, ignoring the way the shadows hissed at her feet. I went to a village in the Cotswolds yesterday. Do you know what I saw? I saw a man trying to fix a tractor with a hammer and tears. He didn't want your eternal harvest charm. He wanted to work. He wanted the struggle. You've taken away the struggle. And now they have nothing to live for. I took away the war. Harry roared, the spire trembling. I took away the hunger. I took away the greed of the few. And replaced it with the greed of the one. Hermione shouted back. You've united the light and the dark, yes. You've created a masterpiece of magic. But you've forgotten the most basic law of transfiguration. You cannot see. Change the nature of a thing without losing what it was. You've transfigured the human race into your pets. Harry moved with a speed that defied the physical. In a blur of shadow, he was inches from her face. The air between them tasted of static and ancient dust. I am the master of death, Hermione, he whispered, his breath cold. I have seen the end. I have seen the heat death of the universe and the emptiness of the afterlife. I am giving them a stay of execution. I am giving them a world that lasts. A world that lasts as a fossil, Harry. She reached out, her hand trembling, and touched the elder wand tucked into his sleeve. This wand, it doesn't belong to a man. It belongs to a force. And forces don't love, they only move. I loved you, Harry said, the words sounding like they were being pulled from a deep, dark well. Then let us go, she pleaded. Break the spire. Let the magic bleed back into the earth naturally. Let the muggles find their own way back to the light. It'll be hard, and millions might die in the chaos, but it will be theirs. Harry looked at her, and for a fleeting second, the green returned to his eyes. The boy from the cupboard under the stairs flickered behind the mask of the god. But then, the spire hummed. It was a predatory, hungry sound. The elder wand pulsed against his arm, reminding him of the ships he had vaporized, the goblins he had silenced, the missiles he had turned into butterflies. The power was too heavy to drop. If he let go now, the vacuum he had created would collapse the planet. I can't, Harry whispered. You won't, she corrected. She backed away, her eyes filling with a final, devastating clarity. The resistance has a name, Harry. They call themselves the Unwritten. Because you've written the fate of everyone else, and they want their pages back. They will fail, Harry said, his voice regaining its cold, sovereign edge. Maybe, Hermione said, but they have something you don't have anymore. They have the right to fail. She turned and vanished into the shadows of the lift. Harry stood alone in the map room. He felt the weight of the globe pressing against his mind. He could feel a rebellion brewing in the ruins of New York. He could feel a ritual being prepared in the forests of Albania. He could feel Ron's heartbeat, steady and defiant, in a cave beneath the Scottish Highlands. He could kill them all with a thought. He could snuff out their lives like candles in a breeze. But he didn't. He kept them alive, not out of mercy, but because they were the only things in the world he couldn't predict. They were the only variables in his perfect, silent equation. The girl is a distraction, Salazar said, appearing behind him. The Unwritten are gathering at the site of the old school. They thin. The ground of Hogwarts still holds a power you haven't claimed. Hogwarts is mine, Harry said. Every stone, every ghost. They are looking for the chalice of the sun, Salazar continued. A mythic focus Helga hid before she passed. They think they can use it to ignite a white fire that will burn through your gray shield. Harry laughed, a dry, rasping sound. There is no white fire strong enough to pierce the void. But if they want to play at war in the ruins of my home, I will meet them there. He walked to the balcony and looked out over London. The Thames was a ribbon of black glass. The city was silent, save for the occasional chime of a sanctum bell. It was a perfect, peaceful cemetery. Prepare the wraiths, Harry commanded. We go to Hogwarts. It's time to show the unwrit. And that their story has already been told. He stepped off the ledge, falling into the dark air, but he didn't hit the ground. He merged with the shadows, a streak of midnight tearing across the sky toward the north. Behind him, the black crown glowed with a malevolent, violet light, a lighthouse for a world that no longer had a sea to sail. The endgame was beginning. The Master of Death was going back to school, and this time, there would be no passing grades for the survivors. End of Chapter 6. Chapter 7. The Architecture of Despair. The ruins of Hogwarts didn't look like a school anymore, they looked like a jagged tooth protruding from the gums of a dying mountain. The great hall was roofless, exposing a sky that Harry had painted in permanent shades of bruised purple and charcoal. The lake was a mirror of black mercury, its surface unruffled by the giant squid, which had long since retreated to the lightless depths of the earth, sensing the shift in the world's apex predator. Harry landed in the center of the courtyard, his feet cracking the frost-covered stones. He wasn't alone. Hovering behind him were the shades of the Founders, though they looked different here. On the grounds where they had once breathed, they were massive, towering entities of elemental force. Salazar was a pillar of emerald smoke, Godric was a bonfire of crimson light. They are beneath us, Salazar hissed, his voice echoing through the drainage pipes, scurrying in the dark like the rats they've become. Not rats, Salazar, Harry said, his voice flat. Family. He walked toward the entrance of the great hall. The heavy oak doors were gone, replaced by a shimmering curtain of gray magic that hummed at his approach. He walked through it and stopped. Standing at the far end of the hall, where the staff table used to be, was Ron Weasley. He wasn't alone. Neville was there, his hands calloused and raw. Ginny was there, her eyes burning with a hatred that Harry felt like a physical blow, and Luna stood to the side, humming a tune that sounded like a funeral dirge. In the center of the group sat a golden chalice, overflowing with a light so white it hurt to look at. The chalice of the sun. You actually found it, Harry said, his voice echoing in the hollow space. Helga's little insurance policy. It wasn't hidden that well, Harry, Ron said. He looked older, his face bearded and scarred from months of living in the wild. You just stopped looking for things that didn't have power over death. You forgot that life has its own weight. That cup won't save you, Ron, Harry said, taking a step forward. The shadows in the hall elongated, reaching toward the light of the chalice. It's a relic of an era that ended the moment I walked out of the forest. The world has changed. The frequency has shifted. The world hasn't changed, Harry. You just put a gag on it. Ginny shouted, her wand leveled at his heart. We've seen what's happening in the sanctums. People are forgetting how to dream. They're becoming shells. You're not a king. You're a Dementor with a human face. Harry felt a spike of cold fury. The Elder Wand slid into his hand, and the air in the great hall began to liquefy. I gave you peace. I stopped the blood wars. I stopped the Muggles from glassing the planet. And you took the soul out of everything to do it. Neville roared. He slammed the sword of Gryffindor into the stone floor. And a shockwave of pure, golden light rippled out, clashing against Harry's shadows. We'd rather die in a nuclear winter as free men than live in your perfect garden as statues. Then die, Harry whispered. The battle didn't start with a spell, it started with an atmospheric collapse. Harry clenched his fist, and the oxygen in the hall vanished, turned into a pressurized vacuum. But the chalice of the sun flared. A wave of white fire erupted from the cup, restoring the air and pushing back Harry's void. Together, Ron yelled. The Unwritten didn't cast individual hexes. They linked hands around the chalice, acting as a circuit. They threw a combined beam of light magic, not the light of the Ministry, but the raw, primordial light of creation. It was a blinding, searing spear of white gold energy. Harry raised the Elder Wand. He didn't shield, he absorbed. He took the hit directly in his chest. The force was enough to crack the mountainside. The great hull exploded outward, the remaining walls crumbling into dust. Harry stood in the center of the crater, his trench coat shredded, his skin glowing with a terrifying, incandescent heat. The white light was swirling inside him, fighting the gray, trying to tear him apart from the inside out. Harry's eyes turned pure white, then back to black, flickering like a dying bulb. "Is that it?" Harry gasped, his voice sounding like 1,000 people screaming at once. "The power of life. It's just heat. It's just noise." He raised his other hand, and the resurrection stone, embedded in a ring on his finger, began to pulse with a rhythmic, necrotic throb. Death is the only constant. Harry slammed both hands together. The white light he had just absorbed was forced through the filter of the Hallows. It came out the other side as a wave of null fire, a flame that didn't burn, but erased. The wave hit the Unwritten's shield. The chalice of the sun began to vibrate, its gold turning to lead, then to ash. One by one, the rebels were thrown back by the sheer ontological weight of the attack. Ron hit the ground hard, the sword of Gryffindor flying from his hand. Ginny was buried under a pile of rubble. Only Luna remained standing, her eyes wide, watching as the white fire of their hope was consumed by Harry's void. Harry walked toward them, the ground turning to glass under his feet. He looked like a god of the end times, a being made of starlight and soot. "You can't win," Harry said, standing over Ron. "I am the end of the story. I am the period at the end of the sentence." Ron looked up, coughing blood, but he was smiling. A bloody, jagged grin. You always were bad at divination, Harry." "What?" "Look at the cup," Ron wheezed. Harry looked at the ash that used to be the chalice. It wasn't dead. Inside the pile of gray powder, a small, green sprout was growing. It was growing at an impossible speed, its roots cracking the glass Harry had created, reaching deep into the earth. "The chalice wasn't the weapon," Luna said softly, stepping toward the sprout. "The chalice was the seed pod. You had to break it, Harry. You had to use your null fire to strip away the old magic so the real magic could wake up." The sprout grew into a tree of white wood and silver leaves in a matter of seconds. As it grew, Harry felt something he hadn't felt in years. The ley lines were shifting. They were no longer flowing toward his spire in London. They were being pulled into the tree. "The world tree," Salazar's shade hissed, his form beginning to fade. "He's restarted the cycle." "No," Harry roared. He lunged for the tree, his hand wreathed in shadows meant to wither it. But as his hand touched the bark, he didn't feel wood. He felt a heartbeat, a human heartbeat. The tree wasn't just magic, it was a bypass. By attacking it with the Hallows, Harry had inadvertently connected his own life force to the very earth he was trying to dominate. The gray was being drained out of him, replaced by the raw, chaotic, uncontrollable green of the wild. Harry fell to his knees, clutching his chest. The white streak in his hair turned a vibrant, living silver. His eyes burned. "You're not the master of death anymore, Harry," Ron said, standing up with Neville's help. "You're just the gardener, and the garden is overgrowing your walls." Across the world, the sanctums began to crumble. The iridescent fog over London lifted. In the Muggle cities, the grand silence broke. A single light bulb in a New York basement flickered to life. A car engine in London turned over. The spire in London began to tilt. Harry looked at his hands. The gold stain was gone, replaced by the dirt of the Hogwarts grounds. He looked up at his friends, his enemies, and saw the terror and hope in their eyes. The balance hadn't been restored, it had been shattered. The magic was no longer a secret, and it was no longer under anyone's control. It was everywhere. It was in the air, the water, the technology. "What have you done?" Harry whispered. "We gave the world back its right to be messy." Hermione's voice came from the edge of the crater. She was holding the Tales of Beedle the Bard, the book now glowing with its own inner light. Harry stood up, the Elder Wand feeling like a normal piece of wood in his hand. He looked at the white tree, then at the horizon where the sun was rising, a real, golden sun. He was no longer a god. He was just a man in a world that was suddenly, terrifyingly loud. "The spire is falling," Harry said, sensing the collapse of his throne miles away. Let it fall, Ginny said, wiping blood from her lip. We'll build something better, something that doesn't need a crown. Harry looked at the Elder Wand. He could feel its hunger, its desire to be used, to conquer again. He looked at the Resurrection Stone. It whispered of the ghosts he could still call. He didn't throw them away. He couldn't. But he tucked them into his pockets, the weight of them a reminder of the monster he had almost become. The Muggles are going to wake up angry, Harry said, looking at Ron. Yeah, Ron said, reaching out a hand to pull Harry up from the dirt. It's going to be a hell of a fight. You coming? Harry looked at Ron's hand, then at the ruined school that had been his first home. He took the hand. Yeah, Harry said, I'm coming. The Master of Death was gone. The Architect of the Void was a memory. But as the world woke up to a new, magical reality, Harry Potter realized that for the first time in his life, he didn't know what happened on the next page. And that was the most powerful magic of all. End of Chapter 7. Chapter 8. The Reckoning of Steel and Spell. The spire didn't just fall, it screamed. When the structural integrity of a 50-story obsidian DLE anchored by the ego of a demigod collapses, the physics are messy. It folded into itself, a slow-motion suicide of stone that sent a seismic shockwave through the heart of London. The Grand Sile, NCE, didn't just end, it shattered like a glass cathedral in a hurricane. Across the globe, the lights didn't just flicker, they surged. In the Pentagon, the subterranean server farms roared back to life with a demonic whine. In the bunkers of the Urals, old Soviet tech sparked and hissed, hungry for the data it had been denied. The Muggles weren't just waking up, they were waking up with a collective, global hangover and a massive, burning desire for vengeance. Harry stood in the ruins of the Hogwarts courtyard, watching the white world tree pulse with a steady, rhythmic light. Around him, the unwritten were catching their breath. The air was no longer cold and sterile, it was thick with the scent of pine, wet earth, and the ozone of returning electricity. It's not over, is it? Neville asked, leaning on the sword of Gryffindor. The blade was chipped, its silver dull. No, Harry said. He felt different. The God-tier weight was gone, but the hallows were still there, humming in his pockets like a low-frequency warning. I felt the grid come back. I felt the satellites realign. They're looking for me. They're looking for all of us. Let them look. Ron spat, though he was shaking. We've got the magic back. We've got the tree. The tree isn't a weapon, Ron, Hermione said, her voice strained as she pored over her glowing book. It's a conduit. It's equalized the pressure. MAGIC is no longer a hidden pocket of reality, it's been spliced into the atmospheric code. But that means they can see it now. They can track it with sensors. They can map our signatures like we're just another radio frequency. Suddenly, the sky above Hogwarts, the sky Harry had kept in a state of twilight for months, ripped open. It wasn't magic. It was a sonic boom. 4 sleek, black shapes tore through the clouds. High-altitude reconnaissance drones, followed by the roar of F-22 Raptors. They weren't dropping bombs yet. They were painting the area with lasers. Scatter, Harry yelled. He didn't use the Elder Wand to shield. He grabbed Ron and Hermione by the shoulders and shunted. It wasn't a clean apparition. It was a violent tear in space-time fueled by the raw energy of the World Tree. They reappeared in the Forbidden Forest, a mile away, just as a barrage of thermobaric missiles slammed into the Hogwarts ruins. The explosion was blinding. The ancient stones of the castle, which had survived 1,000 years of magic and the siege of Voldemort, were turned into white-hot dust by the pinnacle of human engineering. The Great Hall was gone. The towers were toothpicks. They didn't even hesitate, Ginny gasped. Appearing nearby with Neville and Luna. She was looking back at the rising mushroom cloud where their childhood had been. They just erased it. They're terrified, Harry said, his eyes scanning the tree line. And terrified people don't negotiate. They cauterize. Harry, look, Luna pointed up. The drones weren't leaving. They were circling, and behind them, the SKY was filling with transport helicopters. Black Ops. The mundane world had spent the months of the silence preparing for this moment. They had developed null lead ammunition, bullets coated in the same anti-magic alloys the goblins had used, funded by the secret black-budget projects that had been running since the 70s. We can't fight an army here, Hermione said. Not with the tree being so young. If they destroy the tree, the feedback loop will burn out every wizard on the planet. I'm not letting them touch that tree, Harry said. He stepped out from under the canopy of the forest. He looked like a wreck, shirt torn, covered in the ash of his own spire, his white-streaked hair matted with blood. But as he stood there, the Elder Wand slid into his hand. It didn't feel like wood anymore. It felt like an extension of his nervous system. Harry, what are you doing? Ron called out. Giving you time to get the survivors to the deep caverns, Harry said, not looking back. There is a network of tunnels beneath the lake that the goblins didn't map. Go, now. We aren't leaving you to play martyr again. Ron roared. I'm not playing martyr, Ron, Harry said, and his voice had a touch of that old, terrifying sovereignty. I'm playing bait. Harry raised the wand. He didn't point it at the jets. He pointed it at the ground. Terra Formis. The earth didn't just shake, it erupted. Harry pulled on the ley lines with a desperate, violent hunger. Massive pillars of stone and root surged upward, creating a jagged, natural fortress around the world tree. He wove the shadows of the forest into the stone, creating a cloaking field that would baffle the Muggles' thermal and infrared sensors. The jets dived. Target acquired. A voice crackled over the radio frequency Harry could now hear in his mind. Engaging the primary hostile, a hail of 20mm cannon fire chewed through the trees around Harry. He didn't flinch. He danced. He moved with the gray fluidity, a blur of motion that left after images. He flicked the wand, and the air in front of the lead jet solidified into a wall of diamond-hard ice. The jet hit the wall at Mach 1. It didn't explode. It shattered like a toy. The debris caught in Harry's telekinetic grip and hurled at the second aircraft. 2 down. Neville cheered from the shadows, but his face fell as he looked at the horizon. Hundreds more were coming. It wasn't just a strike. It was an invasion. The world's militaries had united under a single banner, the Human Defense Initiative. Harry felt a sharp pain in his chest. The hallows were vibrating. The resurrection stone was starting to pull on the souls of the pilots he had just killed. He could hear their screams, their final thoughts of home and family. Shut up, Harry hissed at the stone. He realized then that he couldn't win this by killing. If he killed 1,000, they would send 10,000. If he burned a city, they would nuke the continent. The gray path, the union of light and dark, wasn't just about power. It was about meaning. He closed his eyes and reached out to the world tree. Help me, he thought. Not for me, for the world. The tree responded. A wave of silver sap pulsed through its veins. And a single leaf fell, drifting toward Harry. He caught it. The leaf turned into a liquid, glowing silver that coated his hand. Harry looked at the approaching fleet. He didn't see enemies anymore. He saw a species that had been bypassed by evolution, trying to claw its way back to relevance. You want to see magic? Harry whispered. I'll show you the magic of the new dawn. He didn't cast a destructive spell. He cast a truth hex. He channeled the energy of the world tree through the Elder Wand and the Resurrection Stone. He created a massive, global, empathy pulse. It wasn't a compulsion. It wasn't a mind control. It was a bridge. Every soldier in those jets, every general in the bunkers, every politician in the safe rooms, they suddenly felt what Harry felt. They felt the cold of the forest, the grief of the fallen, the wonder of the magic, and the absolute, crushing weight of the responsibility he had tried to bear. And Harry felt them. He felt their fear of the unknown, their love for their children, their desire for a world that made sense. The firing stopped. The jets didn't crash. They leveled out. The helicopters hovered in a confused silence. The pilots sat in their cockpits, tears streaming down their faces, overwhelmed by the sudden, psychic connection to the monsters they had been sent to destroy. What was that? Ron asked, stepping out into the clearing. A conversation, Harry said, falling to his knees, the silver sap fading from his skin. I just told them the truth. All of it. Will it hold? Hermione asked, looking at the sky. For now, Harry said. But the bridge is fragile. We've stopped the war, but we haven't built the peace. They know we exist now. Really exist. Not as myths, but as neighbors. In the distance, the lead helicopter, a transport bearing the insignia of the UN, began to descend. It landed in the clearing, its rotors kicking up the dust of the ruined school. The doors opened. A woman in a charcoal suit stepped out. She wasn't carrying a weapon. She was carrying a briefcase and a look of profound, terrified awe. "I am Secretary General Aris," she said, her voice trembling but clear. I believe we need to talk about the future of the planet." Harry stood up, supported by Ron and Hermione. He looked at the woman, then at the white tree, then at the charred remains of the castle behind him. The massive cinematic story of the war was over. The legendary tone of the gods was fading. What was left was the hard, gritty work of two civilizations trying to share a single rock. "Yeah," Harry said, a tired smile finally reaching his eyes. "We do." He tucked the Elder Wand into his sleeve, not as a weapon of a king, but as a tool of a diplomat. "But first," Harry added, looking at the ruins, "I think we're going to need a bigger school." End of Chapter 8. Chapter 9. The Diplomacy of Ashes. The negotiation table wasn't made of mahogany or gold, it was a slab of scorched Hogwarts granite. Leveled by a localized hovering charm. They sat in the center of the crater where the Great Hall had once stood. To the north, the World Tree shimmered, its silver leaves rustle, in a wind that tasted of spring and static. To the south, the perimeter was lined with a tense, terrifying standoff. UN peacekeepers in blue helmets standing shoulder to shoulder with gray wizards in tactical robes. Harry sat at the head of the slab. He had cleaned the blood from his face, but he hadn't fixed his clothes. He wanted them to see the rags. He wanted them to remember that the Ma-En who had unplugged the world still bled. "Let's be real, Secretary General," Harry said, his voice cutting through the hum of the nearby helicopter rotors. "You didn't come here because you want peace. You came here because your missiles turned into butterflies and your soldiers started feelings they couldn't explain. You're here because you're out of ammo." Secretary General Aris didn't flinch. She was a woman who had navigated 3 civil wars and a global famine. She wasn't about to be intimidated by a teenager with a white streak in his hair. "We are here, Mr. Potter, because for the first time in human history, the other isn't just a different nationality or religion. It's a different species of reality. You didn't just break our toys, you broke our understanding of the universe. We need to know if we're living on a planet or in your basement." "It's a planet," Ron chimed in from Harry's right. He was holding a clipboard, Hermione's idea, trying to look like a man of logistics rather than a man of war. "And it's a planet that's currently being flooded with mana. If we don't coordinate, your power plants are going to start manifesting poltergeists and your internet is going to start thinking for itself." "He's not joking," Hermione added, leaning forward. "The veil I mentioned earlier. It wasn't just a curtain. It was a filter. By removing it, Harry merged the two realms. Magic is now a fundamental force, like gravity. Your scientists are going to see it in the particle accelerators within the week." Aris sighed, rubbing her temples. "And what do you want?" "A seat at the UN. A sovereign nation. Hogwarts is a city-state. I want the Statute of Secrecy to stay dead," Harry said, his eyes locking onto hers. The void in his pupils had settled into a steady, deep emerald. But the power still lurked in the periphery. No more hiding in the shadows. No more obliviators, wiping the memories of mothers who saw their kids float. "We integrate. We teach your people how to breathe in this new air. And you teach our people how to live in a world that doesn't rely on a wand for every cup of tea." "Integration is a bloodbath in the making," Aris countered. "My people are terrified. They think you're demons. Your people think we're ants. You're asking for a marriage between a god and a gardener. I'm asking for survival." Harry slammed his hand on the stone, and for a split second, the shadows under the table surged. He caught himself, taking a breath. "The god version of me tried to fix the world by force. It failed. The mundane version of the world tried to fix the problem with fire. It failed. This is the only path left. We build a joint task force. We call it the New Dawn. Wizards in the hospitals, Muggle engineers in the sanctums. And who leads it?" Aris asked. "You." "No," Harry said, and the relief in his voice was palpable. "I'm done leading. I'm a consultant. I'm the guy you call when the reality warping gets out of hand. But the leadership comes from the people. Ron, Hermione, and your best minds. Suddenly, the air above the crater curdled. It wasn't a Muggle jet this time. It was a rift, a jagged, bleeding tear in the sky that looked like a lightning bolt frozen in time. From the rift, a figure descended, not flying, but walking on air. He was dressed in robes of pure, blinding white, but his skin was a mottled, necrotic gray. He carried a staff of twisted black wood that pulsed with a familiar, sickening rhythm. The negotiation is premature, the figure said, his voice sounding like dry bones scratching against silk. Harry stood up, the elder wand snapping into his hand. Who are you? I am the consequence, Harry Potter, the figure said, landing on the other end of the stone slab. You united the Hallows. You tore the veil. You woke up the World Tree. Did you truly think the Ancient Ones would let a boy play with the keys to the kingdom without checking the locks? The Founders, Neville whispered, looking at the shades of Salazar and Godric, who had suddenly appeared, looking genuinely afraid. No, Salazar hissed, his emerald smoke thinning. The Old Ones. The ones we hid from when we built this school. The architects of the First Age. The figure smiled, and his teeth were shards of obsidian. You've made magic common, Potter. You've diluted the great gift by giving it to the masses and the mundanes. You've turned a symphony into a scream. I am here to perform the great culling. He raised his staff, and a wave of anti-magic rolled out, not the goblins' grounding force, but a literal erasure of intent. The hovering charm on the stone slab died. The slab slammed into the dirt. The World Tree's light dimmed, its leaves turning brittle. Run! Harry yelled at Aris and the Peacekeepers. He didn't wait for a response. He lunged. He didn't use a spell. He turned himself into a spear of gray, kinetic energy. He hit the white-robed figure with the force of a falling star. The woe of them were thrown back out of the crater, tumbling across the scorched earth toward the forbidden forest. Harry recovered midair, firing a barrage of shatter hexes that would have leveled a skyscraper. The figure simply swatted them away with his hand. Child's play. You use the Hallows as tools. I am the source of the Hallows. I don't care if you're Merlin's ghost, Harry snarled. He tapped into the resurrection stone. But instead of calling a ghost, he called the weight of the dead. He increased the gravity around the figure by 1,000-fold. The ground beneath the stranger collapsed, forming a deep pit. But the figure remained suspended, unmoved. You've spent so long worrying about Muggles and Ministry workers, the stranger said, his staff glowing with a pale, hungry light. You forgot that there are things in the dark that eat gods. He pointed his staff at Harry. A beam of null light shot out. Harry raised the invisibility cloak, wrapping it around his arm like a buckler. The beam hit the cloak and was refracted, but the feedback sent Harry spinning through the air, his arm feeling like it had been dipped in liquid nitrogen. Harry, Ron and Neville were there now, firing combined bursts of light and dark magic. The stranger didn't even look at them. He waved his hand, and the two wizards were encased in pillars of amber, frozen in time. The negotiation is over, the stranger said, turning back to the crater where Aris and the survivors were huddled. The world is too loud. I think I'll start by silencing the noise. He raised his staff to the sky. Clouds began to spiral into a black hole of magical energy. Harry stood up, his vision swimming. He looked at the Elder Wand. It was shaking. For the first time, the wand was scared. Okay, Harry whispered, his teeth gritted. You want the consequence. I'll give you the whole damn book. He didn't point the wand at the stranger. He pointed it at his own heart. Harry, no, Hermione screamed, realizing what he was doing. I'm not dying, my own. Harry yelled back. I'm just opening the tap. He forced the energy of the World Tree, the Hallows, and his own raw, stubborn soul into a singular, unstable point. He wasn't casting a spell. He was becoming a mana bomb. He charged. He didn't hit the stranger with a punch. He hit him with a revelation. He forced the stranger to feel the connection he had shared with the world earlier, the billions of lives, the messiness, the love, the chaos. The stranger's null magic met Harry's infinite magic. The explosion was silent. A white dome E of energy expanded from the center of the forbidden forest, consuming everything. When the light faded, the stranger was gone. The rift in the sky was closed. Harry lay in the dirt, his skin smoking, his eyes closed. The Elder Wand lay 10 feet away, snapped in half. The resurrection stone was a pile of dust. The cloak was just a piece of gray fabric. The hallows were gone. The God tier power was extinguished. Ron and Neville broke out of their amber prisons, gasping for air. They ran to Harry's side. Harry, Harry, speak to me. Ron yelled, shaking him. Harry opened his eyes. They were green. Just green. No void. No silver. No gold. Just the eyes of a boy who had finally finished his homework. Is he dead? Neville asked, looking at the scorched trees. No, Harry whispered, his voice cracking. He was just a shadow of the old world. He couldn't handle the noise. He went back to the dark. He looked at the broken wand. He felt a strange, overwhelming sense of peace. He couldn't fly anymore. He couldn't turn jets into butterflies. He was just a wizard again. A powerful one, sure, but a mortal one. He looked up at the Secretary General, who was standing at the edge of the forest, watching them with a mix of terror and profound respect. So, Harry said, coughing as Ron helped him sit up. About that joint task force. Aris looked at the ruined forest, then at E-boy who had just saved her from a literal god of the void. She reached out a hand. I think, she said, we can find a budget for it. Harry took her hand. The cinematic war was over. The legends were written. The world was still a mess. The magic was still leaking into the engines, and the future was still terrifyingly uncertain. But for the first time in his life, Harry Potter didn't have a prophecy over his head. He just had a job to do. End of chapter 9 inches. Chapter 10. The Iron Covenant. The transition didn't happen in a courtroom or a palace. It happened in a series of frantic, coffee sty Ned nights in a reinforced bunker beneath Geneva. They called it the Iron Covenant. It was the legal, spiritual, and scientific blueprint for a world where a heart surgeon might have to consult a potions master, and where a wizard might need to understand the structural integrity of a skyscraper before trying to expand his living room with an undetectable extension charm. Harry sat in the back of the briefing room. A nondescript black hoodie pulled over his head. His scar, once a lightning bolt, then a jagged ruin, had faded to a thin, silver line. He was no longer the master of death, but the generals and ministers in the room. He was something far more unpredictable. He was the man who knew how to turn the world off. The primary issue isn't the big magic, Hermione said, standing at a digital podium that displayed a map of the London Underground. She was the chief magical architect of the New Dawn, and she looked the part. Sharp suit, messy hair, and eyes that saw 3 moves ahead. It's the background, mana. The world tree is pumping out a frequency that is interfering with high-frequency trading algorithms and satellite telemetry. We're seeing glitches that are actually localized transmutations. A server farm in Frankfurt turned into a hive of mechanical bees yesterday. And my people are calling it a bio-terrorist attack, General Vance, the HDI representative, grunted. He was a man made of scars and metals, and he looked at Harry as if he were a live grenade. How do we shield the tech without burning out the magic? You don't, Harry said, his voice quiet but carrying through the room. He stood up and walked to the map. You stop trying to fight the flow. You're trying to build walls against a flood. Instead, you need to build water wheels. Water wheels, Vance sneered. Explain, Potter. Quote, we infuse the hardware, Harry said. He pulled a small, silver-etched circuit board from his pocket, something he and Arthur Weasley had been tinkering with. Etched runes, ancient Egyptian grounding symbols combined with silicon carbide shielding. It doesn't block the magic, it channels it. It turns the static into a power source. You want a satellite that never runs out of fuel. This is how you do it. The room went silent. The muggles saw the profit. The wizards saw the survival. It's a compromise, Aris said from the head of the table. A literal marriage of lead and light. But we have a more pressing problem. The unwritten aren't the only ones who didn't like the New Deal. She tapped a key, and a satellite image appeared on the main screen. It showed a remote island in the North Sea. Over the last 48 hours, a massive, swirling fortress of ice and bone had grown out of the water. Azkaban? Ron asked, his hand drifting to his new wand, a sturdy piece of rowan. What's left of it, Aris said. Ever since the Dementors vanished during Harry's grand silence, the prison has been empty. Or it was. Now, our sensors are picking up a signature that makes the world tree look like a candle. It's cold, it's necrotic, and it's spreading. Harry felt a cold finger trace down his spine. The Dementors didn't vanish, they starved. And when things like that starve, they don't just die, they merge. We sent a recon drone, Vance added. It didn't even get within 5 miles before the electronics didn't just fail, they aged. The metal rusted to dust in seconds. The plastic crumbled. It's an entropy field. I'll go, Harry said, already reaching for his coat. No, Hermione snapped. You're not the nuclear option anymore, Harry. You're the consultant. We send a combined team. Tactical Aurors and HDI, null squads. We do this by the book. The book doesn't have a chapter on sentient entropy. My own, Harry said, but he sat back down. 6 hours later, Harry was in the belly of a stealth transport, flanked by Ron and a squad of elite soldiers wearing rune plate armor, the first fruits of the Iron Covenant. The air inside the hold was tense. The soldiers kept checking their mag locks, the wizards kept checking their wand wood. Don't get too close to the gray zone, Harry warned the lead soldier, a woman named Commander Sato. If you feel your breath hitch or you start remembering your worst birthday, you trigger the Patronus flare on your shoulder. Don't wait. Copy that, Potter, Sato said, her voice muffled by her helmet. As they approached the island, the sky turned the color of a bruised lung. The ocean below was dead. No waves, just a flat, black expanse of oil-like water. The fortress loomed ahead, a jagged spike of frozen despair that seemed to suck the color out of the world. The transport shuddered. We're hitting the field, the pilot yelled, engine output dropping. I'm losing the Euros. Patronus engines. Ron roared. The wizards on board slammed their hands into the floor of the plane. Expecto Patronum. A burst of silver light erupted from the fuselage, forming a shimmering, wing shield around the aircraft. The engines roared back to life, the magical joy of the spell acting as a high-octane fuel against the entropy field. They made a hard landing on the jagged shoreline. The moment the ramp dropped, the cold hit them like a physical blow. Form up, Sato commanded. From the shadows of the fortress, the merged entities emerged. They weren't the cloaked wraiths of the past. They were void walkers, shimmering, translucent giants made of localized nothingness. They didn't have faces, only vertical slits that leaked a gray, soul-chilling mist. Open fire. The HDI so. Eldiers unleashed a hail of rune-tipped rounds. The bullets hit the void walkers and exploded in mini bursts of concentrated light. The entities shrieked, a sound that bypassed the ears and went straight to the amygdala. Ron and the Aurors followed up with red-gray hexes, a new blend of combat magic designed to disrupt the molecular structure of non-physical beings. It was a symphony of modern warfare and ancient power. A tank-sized void walker lunged for Sato, its hand turning the ground to ash. Sato didn't move. She triggered her shoulder-mounted flare. A silver stag erupted from her armor, goring the entity through the chest. Harry stayed in the center of the formation, his hands glowing with a soft, steady green. He wasn't attacking. He was anchoring. He was the bridge that kept magic from being sucked into the void and the technology from being rusted by the magic. They reached the heart of the fortress, the old high-security wing. Standing in the center of the ruins was a figure Harry recognized. It was the consequence from the crater, or at least a shard of him. A remnant of the old world that refused to be integrated. You bring the metal and the mud into this holy place. The shadow figure hissed. This isn't a holy place, Harry said, stepping forward. It's a trash heap, and the garbage day is overdue. Harry didn't pull a wand. He didn't use the hallows. He simply reached out and grabbed the air. You think you're entropy, Harry whispered. I've seen the end of time. I've been there. And let me tell you, it's boring. He didn't cast a spell. He shared a memory. He projected the feeling of the burrow on a Sunday morning, the smell of bacon, the sound of Mrs. Weasley shouting, the feeling of a world that was loud, messy, and alive. He didn't fight the darkness, he simply made it irrelevant. The shadow figure screamed as the humanity of the memory tore through its void. Entropy cannot exist where there is growth. The fortress began to melt. The ice turned to water. The bone turned to dust. Within minutes, the island was just a rock in the North Sea again. Sato looked at her HUD, then at Harry. Target neutralized. No casualties. Minimal gear degradation. Good, Harry said, looking at the horizon where the sun was finally breaking through the gray. Let's get home. I think I've got a meeting with the Board of Education at 10. The flight back was quiet. The soldiers and the wizards weren't looking at each other as enemies anymore. They were looking at each other as survivors. Harry looked out the window at the sprawling lights of Europe. The world was different. It was loud. It was dangerous. It was full of magical glitches and technological nightmares. But as he watched a Rune satellite streak across the stars, Harry realized that the Covenant was holding. They weren't gods, and they weren't ants. They were just people, trying to figure out the new rules of the game. And for the first time in his life, Harry Potter felt like he might actually enjoy the play. End of Chapter 10. Chapter 11. The Protocol of the Blood Moon. The skyline of Neo-London was a jagged fusion of Victorian brick and shimmering, monoconductive glass. Above the city, the Rune satellites traced glowing arcs through the stratosphere, acting as a global net that kept the wild magic from curdling the atmosphere. But tonight, the sky was wrong. The moon was a deep, bruised crimson, a blood moon, caused by a massive discharge of necrotic energy from the Siberian Rift. Harry stood on the balcony of the New Dawn Embassy, sipping a cup of black coffee that tasted like iron. He wasn't wearing a hood anymore. He wore a tailored, charcoal gray suit that hid the tactical holsters at his ribs. The resonance is peaking, Harry, Hermione said, joining him. She looked tired, her fingers stained with the iridescent ink used for high-level sealing scrolls. The Muggles call it an astronomical anomaly. The ICW calls it the Great Bleeding. Whatever it is, the veil is thinning again. And it's not because of you this time. It's the feedback loop, Harry said, his voice a low gravel. We pumped too much stability into the system with the Iron Covenant. The universe is trying to find its chaos again. It's like a spring that's been coiled too tight. General Vance is on the warpath, she sighed. Mana Flare just wiped out a drone squadron over the Pacific. He's calling for a hard reset of the ley lines. He doesn't understand that a reset would kill every wizard with a heartbeat. He understands, Harry said, looking at the crimson moon. He just thinks it's a fair price for a world he can control. A sharp, rhythmic clicking echoed on the stone-heeled boots. A woman in a black tactical jumpsuit, her hair a shock of silver white, approached them. It was Commander Sato, now the liaison for the HDI's Ethereal Response Unit. Potter, Granger, Sato nodded. We've got a situation at the British Museum. A vault that didn't exist. An hour ago just materialized in the basement. It's emitting a frequency that's turning the tourists into, well, let's just say they aren't tourists anymore. Ghouls? Ron asked, appearing from the doorway. Checking the charge on his spark wand, a hybrid device that fired concentrated solar magic. Worse, Sato said, echoes. They're stuck in a loop of their own deaths, and they're pulling the living into the loop with them. The team moved. They didn't take a broom or a car. They took a phase shifter, a Muggle-built transport that used magical anchors to slide through the folds of space. Within minutes, they were at the museum. The air outside was thick with a gray, suffocating mist. The screams coming from inside weren't just loud, they were chronologically distorted, some high and fast, others deep and slow. Rune shields up, Sato commanded her squad. The soldiers clicked their gauntlets, and hexagonal fields of blue-gold energy snapped into place. Harry led the way, his hand resting on the hilt of a short blade forged from the shards of the Elder Wand, the Void Needle. They descended into the basement. The walls were weeping a black, viscous liquid. In the center of the hall, a massive stone sarcophagus sat. Unsealed. It wasn't Egyptian. The runes were older, pre-Atlantis. The first coven, Harry whispered. Before there was light or dark, there was the hunger. They didn't use magic, they ate it. From the shadows, the echoes lunged. They looked like people made of smoke and static, their faces stretched in eternal agony. The HDI soldiers opened fire with pulse rounds. But the bullets passed right through the smoke. Standard combat magic won't work. Hermione yelled, her hands moving in a complex pattern. They aren't physical entities. They're temporal scars. Ron, the solar charge. Harry shouted. Ron leveled his spark wand and let out a continuous beam of pure, white-hot solar energy. It illuminated the room, and for a second, the echoes solidified. Now, Sato's team switched to cold iron nets, throwing them over the solidified ghosts. The iron sizzled against the smoke, grounding the temporal energy. But the sarcophagus was still pulsing. A figure began to rise from the stone box. It wasn't a mummy or a ghost. It was a woman, beautiful and terrifying, her skin the color of starlight and her eyes two black holes. She was the Mother of Scars, a priestess of the First Coven. The children play with the sparks of our fire, she spoke, and the floorboards shattered. You have built a cage for the world. You have made the magic small. I have come to let the great dark back in. She raised her hand, and the blood moon above London flared. The rune satellites in orbit began to spark and fail. The city below plunged into darkness. The grand silence, returning for a heartbeat, but this time, it was filled with teeth. Harry stepped forward. He didn't use the void needle. He closed his eyes and reached into his own blood, not for the Hallows, but for the humanity he had fought so hard to reclaim. The world isn't a cage, Harry said, his voice vibrating with a grounded, earthy power. It's a garden, and we're done with the winter. He didn't cast a spell. He initiated a synchronization. He linked his mind to the world tree at Hogwarts, then to the Muggle power grid of London, and finally to the hearts of the people in the room. He became a lightning rod for the entire city's collective will to live. Vita Regenesis. A wave of green and gold light erupted from Harry, so bright it turned the basement into a miniature sun. The Mother of Scars shrieked, her necrotic starlight flesh burning under the weight of so much concentrated life. The echoes didn't just vanish, they were healed. The smoke turned back into the souls of the tourists, who slumped to the floor, breathing and alive. The sarcophagus cracked, the ancient stone turning into sand. The Mother of Scars looked at Harry, her black hole eyes widening. You chose the mud over the stars. The mud is where things grow, Harry said. With a final pulse of power, the priestess dissipated into the air, her essence absorbed by the ley lines. The blood moon faded, returning to its natural, pale white. The satellites in orbit rebooted, their blue-gold light flickering back to life. Harry collapsed, his lungs burning. Ron and Hermione caught him before he hit the floor. You okay, mate? Ron asked, his face pale in the emergency lights. Tired, Harry gasped. Really tired. Sato walked over, her HUD scanning the room. Threat neutralized. The museum is secure. But Potter, the HDI is going to want to know how you just bypassed the global grid. Tell them I'm a wizard, Harry said, a weak smile on his lips. It's what we do. Outside, the sun began to rise over Neo-London. The Muggles woke up, complaining about a power surge, and a strange dream about a red moon. The wizards in the sanctums went back to their scrolls. The Covenant was still holding. It was fragile, it was messy, and it was constantly under attack from the shadows of the past. But as Harry walked out into the morning air, he saw a Muggle girl using a small rune-etched lighter to spark a campfire for her friends, the flame burning with a steady, magical blue. The new dawn wasn't a perfect world. It was a world where you had to fight for the light every single day. And as Harry watched the girl laugh, he knew it was worth the scars. We have a problem at the Vatican, Hermione said, checking her enchanted pager. Harry sighed, straightening his suit. Of course we do. Is it the Pope or the gargoyles? Both, she said. Fine, Harry said, his hand resting on the void needle. Let's go. End of Chapter 11. Chapter 12. The Cathedral of Cold Fire. The Vatican didn't look like a sanctuary, it looked like a fortress of white marble under siege by a storm of silver ash. The protocol of the blood moon had left the global ley lines frayed, and in the heart of Rome. The concentration of belief in ancient history had acted as a lens, focusing the residual necrotic energy into a singular, terrifying point of failure. Harry stepped out of the phase shifter into St. Peter's Square. The air was thick with the scent of frankincense and burning copper. The massive obelisk in the center of the square was glowing with a pale, subterranean light. And the statues of the saints atop the colonnades were no longer stone, they were vibrating, their marble eyes weeping a liquid, iridescent gold. "The Holy See has officially requested New Dawn intervention," Hermione said. Her boots crunching on the silver ash. She was holding a sect meter, its needle spinning wildly. "The Pope is trapped in the Sistine Chapel. But he's not trapped by the shadows, Harry. He's trapped by the light. The false dawn," Harry muttered, looking at the sky. A dome of white-hot fire, cold to the touch, had settled over the Vatican City. It wasn't dark magic, it was the old light, the raw, uncompromising power of the First Inquisitors, awakened by the global mana surge. "Potter, over here," Commander Sato shouted. Her HDI squad was pinned down behind a barricade of tactical shields. Their armor sparked by bolts of white lightning leaping from the cobblestones. "Our tech is frying. The cold fire is rewriting the circuitry. My soldiers are seeing angels in their HUDs, and the angels are telling them to purge the unclean. It's a psychic feedback loop," Harry said, his eyes narrowing. He pulled the void needle from his belt. The blade, forged from the broken shards of the Elder Wand, hummed with a low-frequency gray magic. He didn't charge. He walked, the cold fire parting around him as if he were a stone in a stream. "Ron, keep the perimeter," Harry commanded. "Hermione, find the anchor point. It's not the chapel, it's the archives. On it," Ron yelled, his spark wand unleashing a wave of grounding magic to stabilize Sato's squad. Harry reached the doors of the Apostolic Palace. They weren't locked. They had been fused into a single sheet of gold. He didn't use a spell. He placed his hand on the metal and whispered a single word of unmaking. The gold turned to a fine, yellow mist, and Harry stepped through. The hallway was a nightmare of religious ecstasy. Priests and Swiss guards lay on the floor, their eyes wide, earing prayers in a language that predated Latin. They weren't dying. They were being ascended, their physical forms slowly turning into translucent glass. "Stop this," Harry's voice boomed, amplified by the resonance of the halls. At the end of the hall stood the Cardinal of the Sun. He wasn't a man anymore. He was a pillar of white flame, holding a staff topped with a fragment of the chalice of the sun that Harry thought had been destroyed at Hogwarts. "The Master of Death comes to the house of the Father." The Cardinal spoke, his voice a choir of 1,000 voices. "You gave magic to the commoner, Potter. You turned the divine into a utility. We are reclaiming the fire. We are purifying the world of your gray heresy. You're killing them." Harry pointed to the glass-like guards. "You're turning people into ornaments because you can't handle the fact that the world is bigger than your book. A necessary sacrifice for a world of pure light." The Cardinal raised his staff. A beam of absolute light shot toward Harry. This wasn't a spell Harry could absorb, it was a fundamental constant. He threw himself to the side, the beam vaporizing a marble pillar instantly. Harry lunged, the void needle flickering. He slashed the air, creating a rift of nothingness, to swallow the next barrage of light. He was moving with the predator grace of his god-tier days, but his body was straining. The lack of the Hallows meant he had to burn his own life force to match the Cardinal's intensity. "You are a relic, Potter," the Cardinal roared. "The new dawn is a flicker. The old light is eternal." Harry felt a sharp pain in his chest, a warning. He was overextending. He backed into the shadows of a heavy curtain. "I can't outlight him," Harry thought, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "And I won't use the dark. Not here." He closed his eyes and reached for the middle. The gray, the space between the stars and the soil. "Hermione, now," Harry yelled into his comm link. Anchor severed. Her voice crackled back. Deep in the Vatican archives, Hermione had slammed a null spike into a hidden ley line junction. The cold fire dome over the city flickered. The Cardinal screamed, his form wavering. "No, the purity." Harry didn't use a hex. He used a humanity link, the same technique he'd used in the forest. He sprinted forward, ignoring the searing heat, and grabbed the C.A. Ardinal's flaming staff with his bare hand. The skin on Harry's palm hissed, but he didn't let go. He forced the cardinal to see the mess. He showed him the girl with the blue lighter, the soldier crying for his mother, the goblins, gold, and the smell of rain on a London street. He showed him that the purity he wanted was just another word for dead. The world is gray, you bastard. Harry snarled. Get used to it. The void needle pierced the staff's crystal. An explosion of neutral magic swept through the palace. The white fire didn't burn out. It simply softened, turning into a warm, amber glow. The cardinal collapsed, returning to the form of an old, frail man in red robes. The glass guards shattered, not into shards, but into flesh and bone, gasping as they returned to the physical world. Harry stood over the cardinal, his hand raw and blistered. He tucked the void needle away. Street Peter's Square fell silent. The silver ash stopped falling. The statues of the saints returned to stone, their weeping eyes now just weathered marble. Commander Sato burst into the hall, her squad right behind her. She looked at the unconscious cardinal, then at Harry. Medical. Get a team in here. Potter, your hand. I've had worse, Harry said, though he was swaying on his feet. Ron and Hermione arrived, looking disheveled but triumphant. Ron took one look at Harry's hand and pulled a vial of essence of Dittany from his pocket. You're a magnet for trouble, you know that. We go to the Vatican for a diplomatic check, and you end up wrestling an angel. It wasn't an angel, Harry said, wincing as the Dittany began to smoke on his skin. It was a man who forgot how to blink. He walked to the window and looked out at Rome. The sun was setting, casting long, purple shadows over the Tiber. The world was still broken. The false dawn had been stopped, but the new dawn was still a struggle. The Pope is safe, Hermione said, checking her tablet. He wants to meet the Wizard of London tomorrow to discuss the role of the Church in the Covenant. Tell him I'm busy, Harry said, leaning his head against the cool marble. Tell him I've got to go home and feed a cat I don't have. Harry, Sato said, her voice uncharacteristically soft. You saved the HDI's souls today. My soldiers. They were lost in that light. Thank you. Harry looked at the silver-haired commander. Just keep your tech grounded, Sato. The world's getting louder. As they walked back to the phase shifter, the rune satellites overhead began to hum, a steady, comforting rhythm in the dark. The Vatican was no longer a fortress. It was just a city again. But as Harry climbed into the transport, he felt a cold shiver. In the corner of his eye, he saw a shadow that didn't belong to a pillar or a person. A jagged, black shape that flickered and vanished. The consequence was still watching. And the Vatican had just been a distraction. Where to next? Ron asked, charging the transport's anchors. Harry looked at the horizon. Home. We need to prepare. The old light failed, but the deep dark, it's hungry. End of Chapter 12. Chapter 13. The Singularity of Shadows. The deep dark didn't arrive with a thunderclap. It arrived as a global loss of gravity. For 3 seconds at 2 a.m., every object on Earth, from the pebbles in the Himalayas to the skyscrapers of Neo-Tokyo, drifted 6 inches off the ground. When the weight returned, it brought a psychic scream that knocked out every telepath and sensitive in the New Dawn network. Harry didn't need a sensor to tell him the location. He felt the snap in his own marrow. The rift hadn't opened in a city or a temple. It had opened in the one place Harry had truly called home, the site of the Dursleys' former house in Little Wingy. The resonance is off the charts, Harry, Hermione said, her voice shaking as she strapped on a tactical bandolier of volatile crystals. They stood in the center of a scorched suburban cul-de-sac. This isn't just magic, it's an ontological collapse. Someone is trying to unwrite the last 20 years of reality. The street was a nightmare of non-Euclidean geometry. The suburban houses were stretching upward like pulled taffy, their windows leaking a thick, oily darkness that swallowed the light of the HDI searchlights. In the center of the road, where the pavement had liquefied into a pool of ink, stood a figure Harry hoped he'd never see again. It was a version of himself. But not the man. It was the boy, the 10-year-old Harry with the broken glasses and the oversized hand-me-downs. He stood in the center of the dark pool. But his eyes were the same void black pits Harry had possessed at the height of his power. "Hello, Harry," the boy thing said. Its voice sounded like 1,000 voices whispering from the bottom of a well. "I'm the part you left behind in the cupboard. The part that didn't want to be a hero. The part that just wanted to be gone. Harry, don't listen to it," Ron warned, leveling his spark wand. The silver gold light of the wand flickered and died as the boy thing looked at him. "Commander Sato, get your team back," Harry yelled. "This isn't a combat zone anymore. It's a conceptual one. We aren't leaving you with whatever that is," Sato shouted, though her rune-plate armor was starting to pit and rust as if decades were passing in seconds. "Go," Harry roared, a shockwave of gray magic forcing the HDI squad back toward the perimeter. Harry stepped toward the boy. The void needle at his belt was vibrating so hard it was drawing blood from his hip. "You're not a memory. You're the consequence, wearing a mask. You think you can use my guilt against me? I've processed my trauma, you bastard. I've lived it, have you?" The boy thing tilted its head. "You united the light and the dark. You made a new dawn. But look at the cost. The world is a machine now. A cage of runes and satellites. You didn't save magic, you taxidermied it. I am the raw, hungry thing that magic used to be." The darkness around the boy erupted. A wave of primordial chaos swept through the street. It didn't destroy, it reverted. The tactical vehicles turned into iron ore and rubber sap. The HDI soldiers' weapons turned into sticks and stones. Hermione's scrolls turned back into reeds. Harry lunged, the void needle out. He didn't strike at the boy, he struck at the air, trying to sew the rift shut with threads of gray force. But the boy moved with the speed of a thought. He appeared behind Harry and touched his shoulder. The world went white. Harry wasn't in Little Wingy anymore. He was in the white version of King's Cross Station. But it wasn't empty. It was filled with everyone he had ever lost. Sirius, Remus, Fred, Dumbledore. They weren't smiling. They were judging. "You built a world of lead, Harry," the Dumbledore echo said. "You chose the safety of the cage over the beauty of the wild." "I chose life," Harry screamed at the white ceiling. "You chose control," the boy thing's voice echoed. Harry felt himself slipping into the nothingness. The gray magic he had cultivated was being drained away, replaced by the crushing weight of the void. He looked at his hands. They were turning into smoke. But then, he heard a sound. It wasn't a spell or a choir. It was a rhythmic, mechanical thump-thump. The rune satellites, above. The heartbeat of the new dawn. The sound of a world that was messy, integrated, and trying its best to survive. "You're wrong," Harry whispered, his voice gaining a new, crystalline resonance. "The wild isn't gone. It's just evolved. It's in the circuit boards. It's in the heart of a soldier using a Patronus flare. It's in the marriage of the mud and the stars. He didn't pull on the light. He didn't pull on the dark. He pulled on the now." Harry's eyes flared. Not with green or black, but with a vibrant, living silver gold. He reached out and grabbed the boy thing by the throat. "I am Harry Potter," he growled. "I've died twice. I've ruled the world and I've walked away from it. You were just a shadow of a ghost." He didn't use the void needle to kill. He used it as a conductor. Synchronize. Harry forced the entire global network of the new dawn, every rune, every satellite, every human heart, through his own body and into the boy. He showed the void the beauty of a world that had chosen to be complicated. He showed it the Iron Covenant. The boy thing shrieked. The white station shattered. Harry was back in the street. The pool of ink was evaporating. The houses were snapping back into their mundane, suburban shapes. The boy thing was gone, replaced by a single, flickering spark of black light that Harry caught in his palm. He looked at the spark. It was the last remnant of the deep dark. It wasn't evil, it was just potential. He didn't destroy it, he crushed it into his own chest, reclaiming the last piece of himself. The cul-de-sac was silent. The searchlights returned to full power. Ron and Hermione ran toward him, their weapons returning to their modern forms. "Harry, is it over?" Hermione asked, her eyes searching his face. Harry looked up at the sky. The satellites were glowing with a steady, peaceful blue. The deep dark was gone, integrated into the tapestry of the new world. "The War of the Gods is over," Harry said, leaning on Ron for support. The consequence is paid. What about the rift? Sato asked, her team regrouping. It's a scar, Harry said, looking at the spot where his childhood house used to be. And scars are how we remember we survived. He looked at his friends. They were tired, they were battered, and they were the leaders of a world that was finally, truly, moving forward. Let's go home, Harry said. I think I'm finally ready to see what happens next. End of Chapter 13. Chapter 14. The Weave of the World. The victory at Little Wingy didn't feel like a finale, it felt like a graduation. The singularity of shadows had been the final test of Harry Potter's soul. And by integrating the darkness rather than destroying it, he had stabilized the global weave. But the aftermath was a world that had become fundamentally high magic. The air itself was now a conductor. If you spoke too loudly in a state of anger, the shadows might grow teeth. If you laughed with enough joy, the flowers in the vicinity would bloom in seconds. Harry saw T in the high-tech sanctuary of the New Dawn headquarters, a floating spire of glass and silver-etched steel hovering above the Atlantic. He was looking at a global tactical display. The world was a mess of new growth. Forests were reclaiming abandoned industrial zones in days. The oceans were glowing with bioluminescent mana plankton. The Muggles call it the Great Quickening, Hermione said, walking into the room. She was wearing a lab coat over her robes, her hair tied back in a practical bun. The biological life on Earth is evolving to match the magical saturation. We're seeing children born with the spark, in families that haven't had a drop of magical blood in centuries. It's not just a few anymore, Harry. It's everyone. Within 2 generations, there won't be a mundane left on the planet. The end of the masquerade, Harry whispered. For real this time. It's not just the biology, Ron added, stepping in with a tray of synthetic mana coffee. The tech is evolving too. I just saw a group of kids in Tokyo who've modded their gaming consoles to run on Spirit code. They aren't playing games, they're building pocket dimensions. It's beautiful, Harry said. And it's terrifying. That's why we need to talk about the Aura Bridge, Hermione said, her face turning serious. She tapped the screen, showing a massive structure being built in the Sahara Desert. The HDI and the ICW have agreed. We're building a permanent anchor between the physical and the astral. We're going to stop the rifts by making one giant, controlled gate. But it needs a battery. It needs someone who can hold the frequency. Harry looked at the display. You mean it needs me? No, Hermione said, her voice soft but firm. It needs the Hallows. The concept of them. We've been working on a way to siphon the energy you integrated. We can use your signature to calibrate the bridge, and then you're free, Harry. Truly free. No more sovereign, no more consultant. Just Harry. Ari felt a weight lift off his chest that he hadn't even realized he was carrying. When do we start? Tomorrow at dawn, she said. The next morning, the Sahara was a sea of glass. Thousands of representatives from every nation, wizard and human alike, stood in a massive circle around the Aura Bridge. It was a structure of white obsidian and liquid gold, reaching 3 miles into the sky. Harry stood at the base of the machine. He wasn't wearing a suit or a cloak. He was wearing a simple white shirt and jeans. He looked like the boy from the cupboard, but his presence made the very desert floor vibrate. Commander Sato and her HDI squad stood at the inner perimeter, their rune-plate armor glowing with a steady, peaceful blue. Ready on your mark, Potter. Harry looked at Ron and Hermione. They were the ones at the controls. They were the architects of the future. Do it, Harry said. He stepped into the center of the bridge. A beam of gray energy, the perfect union of light and dark, descended from the sky. Hitting Harry directly. He didn't scream. He didn't fight. He opened his heart. He released the spark of the void he had captured in Little Wingy. He released the echoes of the Elder Wand and the Resurrection Stone. He gave the world the last of the god power he had been hoarding. The bridge flared. A wave of iridescent light rolled out from the Sahara, traveling across the entire globe. It wasn't a pulse of power, it was a pulse of balance. It smoothed the frayed edges of the ley lines. It anchored the ghosts to the soil and the technology to the magic. It created a harmonic weave. Harry fell to the ground as the beam faded. The bridge was now humming with a self-sustaining, eternal light. It was the heart of the new world. Ron and Hermione rushed to his side. Harry was pale, his breath shallow. But when he opened his eyes, the silver gold glow was gone. They were just green. Is it done? Harry asked, his voice a whisper. It's done, Hermione cried, hugging him. The world is stable. The magic is everywhere, but it's ours now. Not yours. Ours. Harry stood up, his legs shaking. He looked at the Sahara. The glass sand was already starting to sprout green shoots of magical flora. He looked at the thousands of people cheering, some with wands, some with tablets, all of them united. What now? Ron asked, grinning. Harry looked at the horizon. He could feel the world tree in Scotland, the sanctums in the cities, and the heartbeat of the billions of people on the planet. He felt small. He felt mortal. He felt wonderful. Now, Harry said, I think I'm going to go for a walk. A long one. Where to? Sato asked, stepping up and offering a crisp salute. Harry smiled. A real, boyish smile that reached his eyes for the first time in a decade. I don't know, he said. And for the first time, I don't think it matters. He walked away from the bridge, away from the spire, and away from the legends. He walked into the desert, the silver-green grass bending under his feet. Behind him, the new dawn was no longer a dream, it was the reality. The story of the Master of Death was over. The story of the world was just beginning. End of Chapter 14. Chapter 15. The Last Lesson. The world didn't need a king anymore, so Harry Potter became a ghost, not the kind that rattled chains or haunted corridors, but the kind that lived in the periphery of a miracle. 10 years had passed since the Aura Bridge had harmonized the world. The new dawn was no longer a revolution, it was just Tuesday. In Neo-London, children rode brooms that used Gra Vidi Assist tech to reach the upper-tier parks, and doctors used stasis charms to hold heart patients in place while nanobots repaired the valves. The divide between magic and science hadn't just closed, it had been forgotten. Harry sat on a weathered stone bench in a small, nameless park overlooking the ruins of Hogwarts. The castle hadn't been rebuilt as a fortress, it had been left as a monument. A skeletal cathedral of ivy and memory. The world tree stood tall beside it, its silver leaves now a permanent part of the Scottish ecosystem. He looked older, but in a healthy way. The white STR-EAK in his hair remained, a final scar of the gray, but his eyes were clear, reflecting the soft amber of the sunset. He wore a simple wool coat and carried a walking stick made of ordinary oak. I knew I'd find you here, a voice said. Harry didn't turn. You've gotten better at the silent footstep charm, Ron. Or maybe I'm just getting deaf. Ron Weasley sat down next to him. He was the head of global security now, his chest decorated with medals from both the HDI and the ICW. He looked prosperous, his red hair graying at the temples. Hermione says you've been off the grid for 6 months. Hot you might have finally figured out how to turn into a bird and fly to the moon. I was in the Himalayas, Harry said, teaching some kids how to ground their intent without burning out their neural links. They're smart, Ron. Way smarter than we were. They don't see the limits we did. That's the problem, Ron sighed, leaning back. The council is worried. There's a new generation coming up. They don't remember the silencing. They don't remember the Iron Rain. They think magic is a right, not a responsibility. They're starting to poke at the edges of the bridge. Let them poke, Harry said. The bridge can take it. It was built by a woman who doesn't know how to fail and a man who was too stubborn to die. It'll hold. Still, Ron said, looking at the ruins. The world is getting loud again. There's talk of expansion, not just on Earth. The Void Engine projects are ahead of schedule. They want to go to Mars, Harry. They want to plant a seedling of the world tree in the red dirt. Harry smiled. Godric would have loved that. A frontier without a ceiling. They sat in silence for a long moment, watching the stars begin to blink through the violet sky. These weren't just stars anymore. They were the targets of a species that had finally unified its spirit and its steel. Do you ever miss it? Ron asked quietly. The power. Being able to snap your fingers and change the weather. Every day, Harry admitted, his voice a soft rasp. It's like a phantom limb. I reach for a world-ending spell and I find a cup of tea instead. But then I remember the cold. The void. The feeling of being the only person in a room full of statues. He stood up, his joints popping. He tapped his oak stick against the ground. Power is a trap, Ron. It's a wall. I'm glad I'm on the other side of it now. Hermione's having a dinner, Ron said, standing up too. The whole lot. Neville's coming back from the Amazon. Apparently he's found a species of orchid that can talk, and it won't shut up about politics. Luna's bringing her latest discovery. You should come. Maybe, Harry said. I've got a few more miles to walk today. Ron looked at him, his eyes filled with a deep, fraternal love. He reached out and squeezed Harry's shoulder. You saved us all, Harry. I hope you know that. Not just from Riddle, from ourselves. We saved each other, Harry corrected. Ron nodded, then turned and vanished in a swirl of silent, silver-gray apparition. Harry stood alone as the moon rose, a normal, white moon. He walked toward the world tree. As he reached the base of the massive trunk, he placed his hand on the bark. He didn't use the hallows. He didn't use the gray. He just felt the heartbeat of the earth. A small child, no more than 7 years old, ran out from behind the tree. She was wearing a digital tunic that displayed a moving map of the constellations. She stopped when she saw him, her eyes wide. Are you the one? She asked, her voice small but curious. The one what? Harry asked, crouching down to her level. The architect, she whispered. The one who broke the world so it could grow back. Harry looked at her. In her eyes, he saw a flickering spark of magic, perfectly integrated with the glowing hud of her tunic. She was the future. She was the synthesis. I'm just a gardener, Harry said, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a small, wooden bird he had carved. He tapped it with his finger, not a wand, just his finger. The bird didn't turn into a real bird. It didn't fly, but it glowed with a soft, warm light, and it began to sing a song that sounded like a London street after the rain. Here, Harry said, handing it to her. A gift from the old world to the new. The girl took it, her face lighting up with wonder. Will I be like you one day? Harry stood up and looked at the ruins of the school, then at the bridge humming in the distance, and finally at the stars waiting to be explored. No, Harry said, his voice full of a final, legendary peace. You'll be much, much better. Quote. He turned and walked away into the shadows of the forest, his silhouette fading until he was indistinguishable from the trees, the wind, and the magic. The Master of Death was gone. The legend was over, but the story of the world went on, written in a language of light, lead, and love, on a page that was finally, beautifully, blank. End of chapter 15. Epilogue. The Gardener's Rest. The footprints in the Scottish mud didn't linger. As Harry walked further into the forbidden forest, the earth seemed to rise up to meet his pace, smoothing over the indentatio ns of his boots until the path behind him was as pristine as a world before man. He reached a small clearing he remembered from a lifetime ago, the spot where he had once dropped a cold, black stone and prepared to die. Now, it was filled with bluebells that hummed in a soft, melodic frequency, their petals glowing with the ambient mana of the Aura Bridge. Harry sat at the base of an ancient oak, leaning his head against the rough bark. He closed his eyes and listened. He didn't hear the roar of the spire or the screams of the void. He heard the distant, muffled laughter of the girl in the park. He heard the steady, mechanical thrum of a void engine being tested in a laboratory miles away. He heard the wind whispering through the silver leaves of the world tree. For the first time since the cupboard under the stairs, the voices in his head were silent. The prophecy was fulfilled. The debt was paid. The Master of Death had finally mastered the one thing the Hallows could never touch, contentment. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn photograph. It was moving. A young man with messy hair and a woman with bright green eyes, laughing as they danced in a kitchen that no longer existed. He smiled at them, not with the grief of an orphan, but with the quiet recognition of a man who had finally made his parents' sacrifice worth the cost. It's a good world, Mum, he whispered. A bit messy, a bit loud, but it's ours. Harry let the photo slip from his fingers. It didn't fall to the dirt. It dissolved into a flurry of white sparks, becoming part of the forest's magic. His breathing slowed, syncing with the rhythmic pulse of the planet. He wasn't fading away. he was simply letting go of the need to be the center of the story. The gray within him settled into a soft, permanent amber. A pilot light for a soul that had seen the end and decided to choose the beginning. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a final, golden glow over the ruins of Hogwarts, Harry Potter fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. He didn't wake up the next morning, or the morning after that. He didn't die, not in the way people usually do. He simply became a part of the architecture of the new world. Travelers would later tell stories of a old man of the woods, who appeared when people were lost, offering a bit of wood and a steadying hand before vanishing into the silver mist. The legend of the boy who lived became the history of the man who changed the world, which eventually became the myth of the king who walked away. But in the end, as the first void ship broke the atmosphere of Earth and steered its silver hull toward the stars, only one truth remained. Magic was no longer a secret. It was the air. It was the light. It was home. The end.